So if there's anybody here who would like to speak to the school committee on any subject not on the agenda, this is their opportunity.
Sorry about that.
Okay, if you are calling in and you need to get our attention, you need to press *9, and that will raise a flag, and I will be able to recognize that you are here and want to speak. But seeing none, we'll go on to a discussion about our, tonight we're going to be interviewing 2 candidates for the position of superintendent. Tomorrow night we'll be interviewing one, Thursday we'll be interviewing another, and on Friday we'll be interviewing the final candidate. At that point we will convene and basically cut the field down from 5 down to 2 or 3. And then we will schedule the meetings for next week. There'll be site visits, both us visiting the site of the candidates as well as the candidate visiting our district. And then there'll be final interviews, and then we will decide on a new superintendent. So that's what we're going forward. Now, Dorothy has sent out the questions that you have selected to use tonight. And the worksheets are simply for your convenience of taking notes. And they are not going to be collected. They're not going to be shown to anyone. You can refer to them when we have discussions about the candidates later on, but they're not public documents. Dorothy, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, just one quick note. I put after each question or each block a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale. Some people like to have that. Some people don't. Use it if you want. There's no requirement that you be scoring or rating. It's just for your convenience if you want to use it.
Okay. And so we will, the candidates are in touch with Dorothy. When we tell Dorothy that to bring them in, she will, I guess, text them and tell them to sign on. And they will come in. We will, we probably should introduce ourselves, and then we'll hand the floor over to the candidate to speak for, do an opening statement, and then we'll go into the questions. And then we will have a closing statement, and we will recess because we're having another one. We're having another one at 7 o'clock. So hopefully, I'd like to keep this to an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. But we're not locked into it. The only thing we're locked into is 7 o'clock, having the second interview. So,
could I just add, if people have follow-ups after a question, to ask Jonathan, let Jonathan know and ask for the floor. Jonathan, I assume you'll be watching the time a little bit to determine whether there's time for a follow-up or.
Yes. I'll try to keep track of the time, as well as to appraise the candidates that if we think they're running over time. We have basically 12 questions and to ask, and if you want to ask a follow-up question, raise your hand or get my attention somehow, and I'll recognize you. You can ask follow-up questions on other people's questions. You'll read your own question, and we'll let them go from there. Laura, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to ask, at the conclusion of the interviews, are we, going to end the interview and then have a conversation, or do we just recess and wait for the next, or adjourn for the night?
I think we agreed that we were going to have a brief conversation. We're not going to go into too much detail, but just so we can get a little feedback from each other about their impressions of the candidate.
And is that executive session, or is that open?
No, it's all open.
Okay.
Everything's open. So, there was some questions about, how do we prevent, the candidates that are coming in later in the week from knowing what all the questions are. And I think we just have to have some faith that there's some level of honesty. I think.
Could I add one more quick thing, is if after if you're listening to the interview and you feel like a portion of your question or your question has been answered already when you get to it, alter it a little bit or say it's been answered, but don't feel like you need to go forward with your question if you feel like it's already been addressed.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We, let's see, we have. Okay. Melissa.
So a question, it won't pertain till tonight, but since we only have this extra 15 minutes before this meeting, if at our next meetings during the week, if a member is not here, present in the meeting, how will that question be put forward? Will you as chair put it forward, or?
Yes, we'll still ask all the questions. But unless somebody else really wants to do it, I'll just read the question.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. I just had 2 seconds. I'm in a little thing here. So I'm in my vehicle. I'm stopped right now. So if I don't answer you or I can't ask my question, Jonathan, will you ask my question, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll have to find it.
Jonathan, she sent, I think.
Yeah, I know. It's not on the sheet, but it's not on the sheet. I just got to look up the email.
Safathia, do you have a preference on which one?
She's muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I did. I thought we were allowed 2. I sent in 4 so someone could pick 2. But anyways, at least, and they said that the bottom one, someone else is, but I thought it was 2 questions, but now it's down to 1. So I'd like the middle one.
Okay.
I would like to know that if he's ever been in a crisis where that he had to make a decision and so forth. You know what? And it was not a decision like we're doing right now that everyone will like.
Okay.
That question. But I thought it was 2 questions and now it went down to 1. So.
Well, it's everybody's asking 2 questions, but they're asking 2 questions on 2 different topics. Except you and I, we're only asking 1. Because there's 12 questions total.
So if you would like me, if you're ready, I can text Susan Kuska and see if she's ready to join you.
Jonathan, can I just say that some of Safathia's questions might be able to be asked at the same time? Instead of just one of her 4, you might be able to combine that a little bit if you look at it, because some of the other questions that other members are asking have 1, 2, or 3 parts. So you might be able to do that with Safathia's question because her questions are important.
Right.
So I don't know if while you have a little bit of downtime while you're looking, if you can somehow coordinate that a lot of that questioning gets into one question. I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm just looking for Safafia's questions now.
I just emailed them to you, so you might have got my email.
Okay. I did.
I mean, it looks like the second and third one could be combined. The fourth one, it looks like Laura's asking something
Yeah.
similar.
Laura's
So
got that one covered with her question.
So I think you could combine the other three into one question.
Okay. I'll do the best I can. Yeah, we could, is everybody ready to start?
Kathy seems to be missing.
Oh, okay, well, let's see if she returns. There she is. She's back. Okay, well, if everybody's ready, we'll bring in, is it Kuska?
Kuska. Yep.
Kuska, okay. Susan
Yeah, Kuska. You said it right the first time.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. I will send her a text, and when she joins, I'm going to turn off my screen.
Okay.
So the text is sent.
Okay, so she is
Give her a
going,
minute or two.
she's going to appear as a panelist.
Yes. You can put your screen in speaker view so that you see her,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody else too.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Kuska. Welcome to the interview with for the position of Superintendent of Schools, Gloucester Public Schools. I'm Jonathan Pope. I'm the chairman of the school committee, and we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Texera, Vice Chair of the School Committee. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Clancy. I'm Chair of the Building and Finance Subcommittee.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
Joel.
Hello, I'm Joel from Mazza.
Hello.
And Samantha.
Hello, I'm Samantha Watson. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Samantha. You as well.
And Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Wiesen. I'm the secretary of the school
Hi.
committee.
Hi, Laura.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Safafia, are you?
I'm here. This
You're
is
here.
Safafia Romeo taken, yes. With like with 5,000 different glasses and everything else on. Yep, I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm glad you made it. Okay, so we have some questions. We're going to give you an opportunity to start by just giving us a little overview of yourself and an introduction, and then we'll go. We're going to do about 12 questions, and then there'll be an opportunity to wrap up. And you got the short straw, so you're going first.
I know. I wonder about that sometimes. What was my thinking? But
Okay, so just go right ahead and tell us about yourself.
well, good evening, and thank you so much for having me here tonight. I've known for a long time that I have the leadership skills and the desire and passion to be an excellent superintendent. I've been in many ways training for this my whole life, and particularly in my 25 years as an educator. I do feel that I have a very, very diverse background, given that I have strengths with special education, general education teaching. I've taught multiple grade levels. I've been a building level administrator, curriculum leader. I've done administration and personnel for multiple departments. So I have that operational oversight, collective bargaining, food services, multiple departments that I've had to help lead. And then I've overseen up to 1,300 staff members in the area of personnel and HR. I feel that I have lots of strengths, and we know we all have weaknesses, but I feel like this is a really opportune time for me to begin a career as a superintendent. I still have a lot of passion for students. I've always loved children, and pre-K to 12, there are strengths at all ages that I've enjoyed working with. It's time for me to take on this role. I do feel like I have a lot to give back. I've learned a lot. I've mentored many people. I've trained people to become better leaders and better teachers themselves. I've evaluated multiple leaders over the years. And I do think that it's something that I've really thought would be a wonderful career goal for me. Gloucester is a wonderful town, a beautiful town. I'm interested in relocating closer to there so that I could be very actively involved in the district, because when I'm in, I'm all in. I give 150% or more of myself, and I really want to be very much immersed in the community. So I'm hoping that you give an opportunity to get to know me a little bit tonight and find out that I'm an excellent match for your district as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel, you have the first question.
Okay, good evening again. And so this question, it can be either answered based on research that you've done looking into our district, or also just as to common issues facing districts throughout the Commonwealth. And the question's a two-part, but I'll try and keep it simple for you so as not to get too wordy. What would you perceive to be the biggest or most pressing challenge facing our district that you will be able to make swift progress in addressing? And what do you see as the biggest or most pressing challenge that will take the longest to overcome?
Well, I think if I were to look at immediate things that we would want to be focusing on in Gloucester, certainly I've seen that there's been some improvement in your district overall, moving through the levels, and also more recently getting closer to your targets. So that's wonderful to see. I know that there are challenges with the student population declining, and we see that in many towns, and that gets challenging because our budgets are increasing, and particularly mayors have budgets that they have to balance the budget, and when declining populations are happening, it's very hard as a superintendent to justify, even though we know we need the funds. It's hard to justify why the funds are continuing to increase when the population declines. I do think that there are opportunities for growth within the student population. There are surrounding areas that I think we could do a lot to increase and encourage students to come. Not trying to take away from others, but at the same token, one of the areas that I thought would be a critical area to focus on is family engagement. I do think that if you have district-wide events that are engaging all students and providing equitable opportunities before and after school for students. One of the things I did when I was in Weymouth was I had a family engagement, a family community engagement committee, and we did year-round events that all students could come to, particularly with the fact that we had 8 primary schools feeding into 1 middle school, and that helped with the equity for students. Also, I do think that's a way to advertise and market the districts in a positive way, because I typically would invite all students. It wasn't just for our students in the Weymouth Public Schools. All the private school students were welcome to come to those events. Students from surrounding communities, as well as parents that worked for the schools, I would invite all of them to bring their children there. So we had more students at just Weymouth, and I think that was a way to really showcase the schools. And I think that's something I would like to do in Gloucester as well. The more we market the schools in a positive way, having open houses, showcasing our students. And as I mentioned with family engagement events, I would always invite high school students to both come as volunteers to help out at the events, but also showcase a lot of the things that they were doing at the high school. For example, like you, I had a strong CTE program, comprehensive high school, and I would have the robotics program come and present their things that they had created. And I would have a lot of times we would sell some of the products that the Wildcat Cafe made. So I think that the more that you can have these family engagement events and really showcase the wonderful things that are happening there, not just to the students in the community, but also even the broader community, to invite them to come join us. So that's one area I think that might help with to sustain the population and the changes that you've had over time. And then overall, I just think that not only Gloucester, but as a nation, as a state, we're all seeing severe trauma with our student populations in general. Society has changed drastically. And now with this pandemic, we're seeing students that were maybe never even traumatized are going to come back to school feeling a lot of trauma and anxiety about returning, not to mention our staff as well. I think you're going to need to put some very clear expectations and supports in for both staff and students, because that social emotional piece that was always a concern and needing to be really delved into is going to need to be ramped up even more. And I think this is really when resilience is going to be needed even more and more today. We see students with trauma needing to build that area for themselves. That's what I focused my dissertation work on. It's on adversity and overcoming adversity to help with instill intrinsic motivation for college and career success for students. And I truly think that the more we can sustain our students and help build the social emotional piece, but even beyond that, help them develop some grit and resilience so that they can handle difficult things that whoever thought something like this would hit our lives in our generation, we didn't suspect it. So our students now are dealing with this, are going to overcome it, but returning to school is going to be very traumatic for them. And I think it's going to be something that we need to embed throughout the school day. How can we both make them feel safe, but also help build the resilience so that they can overcome more obstacles in the future and be successful as well. Thank you.
Are there any follow-up questions? Okay, well, seeing none, we'll move on to Mayor Taken. We'll have a question for you. Safaviya?
John, Jonathan, please ask it. I'm driving and I can't look it up.
Oh, okay. All right. Mayor Taken is in transit, as you just heard, and let's see. So her question was, leaders are often required to make difficult decisions. Tell me about a time you made a decision that not everyone agreed, and what are the most important traits that you rely on as a leader? So there's two parts.
Okay, sure. I can think of many decisions. And this is the hard part about being a leader, particularly my role in personnel and operations, but then also as a superintendent. As much as we want to be liked by everyone, and I am a person that's very compassionate and caring, and I do think I have very good people skills, and I am someone that people relate to very well. But at the end of the day, there are decisions that are going to be made that aren't going to be favorable to everybody. And I've dealt with that in many different instances. One instance that I can think of is when I was helping to try to balance the budget for one of the school years, and we were seeing, like you, some declines in our student population. The numbers were getting to the point in some of the schools that we could actually decrease some of our elementary staffing ratios. And we did so, and because that money could offset some of the other positions that we were trying to bring back that we had lost over many years, curriculum positions, coaching positions, and so forth. So we did agree under my recommendation to decrease some of the numbers at certain schools. And it just so happened that there was a bubble, and I believe it was 3rd or 4th grade at the time, that was going through that was really within a reasonable range, but it wasn't at the ideal low end that we like to see. So the numbers were creeping up a little bit, and parents were, as you can imagine, not happy that their particular student bubble going from 3rd grade to 4th grade was not going to be added back positions, even though, again, the numbers were reasonable. It wasn't that they were too high, but seeing some of the numbers in some of the other grades were a little bit lower. It gets challenging in some of my smaller buildings when you have to combine classes. If you have only 2 of a grade level, it's hard. You can't go down to 1, but if you have 3 or 4, you can sometimes decrease the teacher and use that money in a more, sometimes we brought back adjustment counts and so forth. So this particular year, after we agreed to stay with a certain number of staff, some parents met with, I think, the mayor at the time and the school committee chair and superintendent, and were very much advocating to bring those positions back. So I met with the parents as well, and we agreed, because there was a concern and to make them feel more comfortable, we did agree to put, on my recommendation, add paraprofessionals at that grade level for the 3 buildings that were impacted in this manner. That was agreed upon by the parents. Again, it wasn't probably the most ideal situation, but we added the paraprofessional staff. People felt supported, they felt listened to, and at the end of the day, it was a sound decision, but it didn't have a severe negative impact to the budget as well. And at the time, I felt it was a fair decision for everybody. In a perfect world, I think superintendents would love to be able to add as many teachers as possible, and ideally, we'd like to keep our student numbers as low as possible in grade levels. However, my research over time has also taught me that the actual gains for students in smaller classes is not as significant as a good teacher in front of those students. And as much as a teacher myself, I've had numbers in my class sometimes as low as 16, and I would have sometimes as high as 24 or 25. And traditionally, the research does show that the impact of good teaching overcomes, in all cases, the numbers over time. So this was the discussion that we had with parents, and the year started off smoothly. Again, what started out as something that people were not favorable about, they did feel listened to, and the solution that we put in place upon my recommendation did sustain over time and allowed us to build back some of these other positions. As I mentioned, these social emotional concerns allowed us to bring back some adjustment counselors to the buildings, and we felt it was a win-win overall for the school district.
Any follow-up questions? Joel?
Thank you. Just to touch on that concept of good teaching. So when teachers facing a class that's historically been 18, 19 students per year, and it's going to bump up to 26 the next year due to a reduction in force like this, you'd mentioned the use of support staff. I'm just trying to think of what's the strategy to help enable that teacher to maintain the level of good teaching. As you know from experience, it's a different animal when there are another 8 students in that room, and even a quote unquote good teacher may struggle initially to adjust.
Correct, and I can vouch for that as well. I certainly found I felt more successful in my smaller number grades because I felt like I could give them more individualized time than I could when I got into the larger numbers. And I did have to get very creative with grouping students appropriately, differentiated learning, which should be happening at all times anyhow. I think all of the things that we do as good teachers and need to sustain as good teachers are what we need to do better when when the numbers, whether they're low or high. But yes, I also feel that teachers maybe need some supports. For example, as a principal in a building, and I would recommend this to the principals, if you have a teacher that maybe one teacher has 16 students, another has 23, then I would recommend that we try to reduce their extra duties. A lot of times we give staff duties before school, after school, during planning, opposite their planning times when they have blocks that are open. And I would certainly highlight the teachers that probably could get some reductions so that they would have a little bit of more planning time. And I also believe that we try to support the staff by the support staff in the building, making sure that they're available to sometimes to co-teach with the teachers. Certainly sometimes we've had some of our special needs classes when you can add a co-teacher in the special ed department to support the students in there. That helps teachers be more successful as well. And ultimately, over time, I think the biggest thing is making sure that we have sustainable professional development that's ongoing. One of the things I worry about is some of these one and done, and I've seen it happen. I've brought in trauma-sensitive schools training for our staff, and I wanted to roll it out to the entire district, but it was such a labor-intensive, time-intensive program that I wasn't able to get the buy-in for that. And when we do these one-time things, they can make a difference, but certainly not as much as over time. So that when teachers need additional training, we really should be doing it for multiple years and sustain it over time. And I believe it's important to tie the professional development plan to your budget, to your strategic plan, to your technology plan. If you can tie those all together and teachers see that continuity and also are given the supports that they need at the building level, then, and I think also we need to make sure that teachers feel supported, respected, and that we trust them to do their job well. And as administrators at the building level and the district level, we need to be there to hear them when they have concerns, to listen to their concerns and problem solve with them and respect them as the professionals they are. So it's not an easy solution, but I do think that we really need to take the time and support in the best manners that we can.
Melissa?
So you thank you for that detailed answer. And I think you may have answered this question already, but you seem to have a lot of accomplishments working with your staff in other districts. Can you tell me what traits you have that makes you successful in getting this done? And you kind of touched on a little bit, like you're obviously a good listener, but what is it that you do to gain camaraderie with your staff to get these accomplishments done?
You know, I feel probably the most important thing I've done to be able to build that camaraderie. The trust that you build and the relations that you build with staff are so important and early on, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't come into a district and expect to change things drastically. You need to sit back, hear what's going well, hear what needs to be worked on, hear the concerns of the staff, and not react until you've taken time to vet the process. That being said, there have been many times, the question that we asked earlier about an unfavorable decision to certain people. There have been many decisions that I've had to make, as I mentioned, that not everybody is going to be in favor of, but we have to make the best decision we can with the cards that we've dealt with the most amount of positive impact with many people, particularly students. Students come first, and that's the conversation I have with staff almost at every meeting when I'm meeting with them. Whatever the outcome of my decision, it's going to be first about what is the best decision that we can make for the students and for the student growth. And then staff are equally important, but we are in this business for children. I love them. I've done this for 25 years, so they do come first. And I think that's why we're all here today. So I can tell you for sure that I've had some issues with, for example, I had one of my principals came to me seeking additional personnel in his building. He was having a hard time getting the schedule to fit all of the needs of the students. And I worked with him on the schedule to try to counteract that. That being said, I was not able to add the staff back that he wanted. And he, at the end of the meeting, he said to me, you know what, Susan, I don't agree with that decision. I still think that I need these staff in my building at this time. That being said, because I trust you and because I respect you and I know you're trying to do what's best for the district, I will support you. And we agree that sometimes we have to disagree. When we leave that room, we're a united front. And that's the conversation I've had many times with staff. And I'm happy to say I've had many administrators and teachers say to me, they always know what to expect from me. I'm very clear and consistent with expectations. I'm not going to waffle with my decisions. I make sure I vet them properly. And I think the more that staff see that you're in it for the long run and you're not going to just overturn decisions for the wrong reasons, buckling to pressure and so forth, they start to trust that you'll be there and sustain them and sustain the district as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Samantha? Samantha, you have the next question.
Got it.
Yep.
So what are the core values that drive you as an educator, and what core values would you want to see in the staff you hire?
Well, one of the values is certainly strong ethical and moral values. I feel like if we're to be role models for students, we need to practice what we preach. And I will never expect more from staff than I'm willing to give myself. I do believe an important role of a superintendent, while we wear many, many hats, one of the most important things I believe that you offer to staff and to students is to be their mentor, be their role model, be there and someone that they can look up to. And that's when I mentioned earlier about helping to build student resilience. I'm a person that had to struggle through much adversity in my life, both professionally and personally, to reach my level of success today and my personal success. That being said, students need to know that once they work through struggles and see people that they've had strong role models in front of them, I think it's very important for their own personal growth. And I think it's important for the staff's growth as well. Was that okay, I'm sorry, I heard a beep.
Oh, it's nothing.
Oh,
There was
okay.
nothing. Those.
Sorry. So that I do feel that that's something I have a lot to offer. And I also think that as a strong female leader, and I'm a very assertive person, but I'm also a very compassionate and caring person. And I do think both students of male and female students and male and female staff definitely benefit. In today's society, we still see a lot of bias in the world. And I think the more that they can see strong female leaders rise into roles such as a superintendent, I do think that both our male and female students gain from those experiences and seeing those role models in front of them. And I do think that that's something that's a really important part of what I bring to the table. And also that collaborative approach is very important. There are going to be many decisions as a superintendent that you do have to make. And at the end of the day, you have to own the decision for the district, whether it's right or wrong. The superintendent is the final stop there. But if we can vet the decisions properly, make sure that we've given the time, as I mentioned, listening to the right stakeholders involved in that decision, but also I can't be perfect. I'm not going to do everything well. I do think I have a lot of strengths, but we all have our weaknesses. For me, it's very important that identifying the leaders in the district who also have strengths that would complement mine and relying on their expertise. It takes a village to raise our students and educate our students. And it's never going to be about top down for me. It's really about the collaborative approach. We're in this together, supporting one another together. And I really value what I learned from the leaders around me that have expertise that I may not have. Thank you.
Take your question.
Hi.
Hello.
How have you built lines of communication and reached out to build community constituencies and strengthen relationships with local stakeholders and families, which you've started to talk about?
Mhm.
And the second part of that is, please give an example of a situation in which these relationships were important in achieving a positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I was often designated in my role as assistant superintendent, there were often times that my superintendent could not attend a lot of the meetings with the mayor and the department heads on the town end, and the schools were always invited and expected to attend. So I was fortunate that as a representative of the school department, I was able to meet with the chief of police, the fire chief, the DPW head, and all of the other department heads throughout the town, as well as the mayor and chief of staff. So that when we started to have the conversations together, I was able to slowly talk about the needs of the school district so that when budgetary things came up, it wasn't a surprise. And also trying to build that camaraderie, because you never want it to be us and them. You really want it to, we're all in this together. It's one town, one budget overall. And I never want to have that tension between the schools and the other town leaders, because we need each other to survive and sustain the work that needs to be done and help grow our schools and grow our students. So I've always felt it was very important to try to build positive, trusting relationships with all of those key stakeholders on the town level, so that when needs came up, and sometimes they were unforeseen needs, that trust was already there, and it wasn't that thinking that the schools were always taking too much and wanting too much. And I can give an example of where that really helped. When I was really rolling out, safety and security was one of the areas that I was asked to take on for the district, particularly in the times when schools started getting into, before they even got into active shooter scenarios and training, I was identifying some of the needs of all of our buildings. And then when the active shooter training came up, I jumped in very quickly and brought in a team to train all of our leaders, and brought in firemen and also police officers that got trained in the district with us. And I then wanted to put a long-term plan for safety, professional development throughout the rotation for PD throughout the year. I talked to one of the captains who worked with the chief of police, and I asked, could I do 6 days a year so that on 6 days, 2 buildings out of the 12 were trained throughout our 6 rotations for the professional development. That was at a cost for the police department, because he had to give me that staff and put them in the building with me, 2 buildings, 6 times a year. And it was costly for him, but he valued and appreciated and respected the work that I was doing and trying to support their work that they needed to do at the town level as well. So we did that each year. I would do professional development with the staff. The police would come in and act as the active shooters. We'd all retrain the staff again throughout the cycle. And then each year thereafter, when I had new staff come in, the chief of police was very happy to help me in that manner again. So that was one way of, and I think it was important that I was able to foster those relationships by attending those meetings. I may not have had as much face time and been able to develop that rapport, but I was fortunate that I was able to do so. But then also with parents, because my role was with personnel, it was different when I was in my curriculum role in Hanover. I definitely had more face-to-face interactions with parents because, for example, as well as rolling out the curriculum, I was developing standards-based report cards. I had meetings with parents, about their concerns with curriculum, but also when I was rolling out new things like our standards-based report card, I did training for parents at night and during the daytime. When I moved into a personnel role, as you know, that role gets a little bit removed, which I did miss more of that instructional capacity that I had had in the past. But that being said, when I was asked by my superintendent, again, to take on a new role as family engagement, I jumped into that because it was something I really enjoyed. And I saw a lot of inequity from building to building. I mentioned earlier that we had 8 primary buildings that are K-4 buildings, and some of our buildings were more fortunate socioeconomically than others. One building in particular, I would have a principal come to me and say, Susan, can you help me at the district level in any way? Because my parent-teacher organization doesn't have the funds, doesn't have the time, doesn't have the cultural capacity. We had a lot more English language learners at the school. For many reasons, they couldn't do the enrichment opportunities that other students were getting at other schools. And it was inequitable. So my use of the Family Engagement Committee was to build that equity throughout the school district. And I was very successful with my team. We came up with year-round events. One of them that I liked the most was our Full Steam Ahead. And the first year I bit off a little bit more than I could chew. We did a 7-hour event on a Saturday. We had high school volunteers. We had all kinds of volunteers in the community. But what was exciting about it, as much as the work that was overwhelming, the community liaison and then I that did the yeoman's work in the situation, we had about 400 people attend. So it was very exciting to have that. And it was able to balance off some of the equity that I talked about so that students from one side of town could have the same experience as the other side of town, which I always felt was unfair. So I was able to engage with parents more often in that manner, which I found very rewarding. But also, one of the things we tried to do was anytime we had something, when the curriculum leaders were planning things, I would try to plan something that parents could attend as well. And we'd have an event for students with family engagement, and then the parents would attend the curriculum event, for example. We'd do a social emotional movie if we were teaching parents about social emotional learning. And the other piece is, because I did have a diverse student population, about 25% students of color, and we had 400 plus ELL students, as well as 40 plus different languages in the district. So I was worried that those parents and students in particular were not getting the communication to attend these events. And I worked with my transportation supervisor, and she agreed to try to offer transportation at night to these events so that these students who may not have transportation would be able to attend with their peers. So I was always hard on myself because I felt like always wanting more and more. Over time, I've learned to really be very proud of the gains that are made and the baby steps you make along the way. When we can engage many students and parents, it's always exciting. But for me, I was always worried about what more can I do to help engage, particularly our marginalized students who might not be able to attend some of the opportunities that we would offer at different buildings. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. I have a follow-up, but I can wait for someone else's.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
You want me to go ahead, Jonathan?
Yeah, I don't see anybody else raising the hand, but I don't see everybody.
Samantha hand raised.
Oh, okay. Samantha?
No, she doesn't want to.
Let Laura go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to ask, and then beyond sort of the official stakeholders in the community, how would you reach out to the broader community, sort of the taxpayers and grandparents and people who might be a little bit further removed from the schools, but of course who have a stake in their success as well?
Certainly. Well, given my role as assistant superintendent, the way I would manage that was the superintendent and the other assistant superintendent and I always would attend the meetings at the mayor's office where we would reach out with parents, particularly when we were trying to sustain a budget that was maybe unsustainable at the time. And we did offer parents to come to these meetings and ask questions about it. And I'll just give one example of a situation I think that relates to this. At one time, as I mentioned, budgets are always very controversial because we can never get the funding that we need, and there's always a give and take there, but we have to prioritize the most important priorities in the district. And in one particular building, we had a situation where, like the bubble I mentioned earlier, it was a bubble of students coming through, and it was forcing us to have to come up with another classroom that we did not have in this building. And the superintendent at the time decided that she would have half-day kindergarten. I'm not sure if it was full day or half day. I'll have to think. It was half-day kindergarten. I apologize. We were going to put the half-day kindergarten program at our building down the street, which is probably about 2 miles from the other building, for 1 year. And as you can imagine, parents were very upset about that because they didn't want their children to attend kindergarten in a different building. So as a community, we met with parents at night, and there were parents that I reached out by phone. Some called me, and I had some face-to-face meetings with some of them. But in this particular instance, the angry parents got together, and they really wanted us to remove our therapeutic learning center from the building, which was, as you can imagine, a high-risk program and a sustainably over time, it's a tough program to sustain, and the needs of those students were significant. We did not, as a leadership team, think that was the best decision for those students because they were being successful at this building. That program had really developed very successfully, and we also had moved certain staff there to sustain that program. What surprised me at the time was that some of the parents were very much in favor of that move. In fact, argued that we needed to make that move happen. And I had parents call me saying that if their students, their kindergarten students, had to go to the other building, could I guarantee that they would not ride the bus with the other students for that 1 year? And it was a little bit, I think for me, I guess maybe I have rose-colored glasses on sometimes. I like to believe that we've evolved so far, but I realize, and there is a lot of bias still, and we have to be aware of that and not have those rose-colored glasses on. So in this situation, I could not guarantee that the students would not ride the bus, because in my thinking, literally the building was less than 2 miles away. It was a wonderful building. I loved visiting this building, and I was very surprised to see that I think it was really the socioeconomic difference from building to building that was really concerning these parents, and there was a judgment about the student population at one building. We did end up moving that kindergarten population for that 1 year because we felt it was the least impactful decision. Again, not everybody was happy, but we still had to do what we felt as a leadership team was best for our overall student population. And I remember one of the teachers that had to move with that program was very upset because she had been at that school for many years. And I did say to her, the following year, if I have the ability to bring you back, I'll be happy to do so. Well, the following year I did have an opportunity for her, and I met with her. I went to the building to offer her to return to the previous building because she was very angry and upset about the change. That teacher begged me to have her stay. She loved the building so much. So I think, how you handle those situations and taking the time to, sometimes I've taken more time to listen and sit in a meeting with someone than I really have to give at the time. But I do feel that the end results have been worth that extra time. And in this situation, I had I mentioned parents were upset, but I did listen to them. We heard out their concerns. We did the best that we could do in the end. And then with the staff, same thing with the staff. It wasn't the first time I had to move a staff member from another building. And I have to say, almost every time they've had to move, I've always found them the best position I could for them. And almost every time they've begged me, please don't make me go back. I love where I am. It doesn't mean they didn't like the other building, but they were just so happy with the change and the positive experience that they had had through our interactions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jonathan, you're muted.
Okay, you wanted to follow up on that, Laura? We're running a little behind time, but
I just wanted to say if you have any experience using local media and reaching out in more direct in those ways, or how to best use those facilities.
Certainly, anytime we've tried to, talking about events that we were having, trying to encourage things. School Messenger was a big communication tool of mine, and obviously we have to make sure we communicate in the most high ratio of languages that we have in the district. For me, it was Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic at the time were the top three after English. But I also felt that wasn't enough. So I worked very closely with our principals to see if we could identify, particularly for open houses and things like that, that we could have some staff members that could help communicate to parents. And I was very lucky that I had a community, the district was about 6,000 students. So I had a staff member that worked there for many, many years, had been a parent. She became our community liaison, and she was a real go-getter that helped me to engage with the parents and communicate with the parents. And one of the things we did, in addition to ongoing communication with parents, went through, as I mentioned, School Messenger, but we also had a lot of, anytime we were marketing or just highlighting wonderful things that were happening at the building level, she was very successful at getting the newspaper to come to these events. And I think that's, again, a way that parents that may not see all the positive things that are happening when it's in the newspaper and it's highlighted there, things like someone mentioned grandparents and stakeholders and community members that may not feel like they can afford taxpayer funds increasing or real estate funds increasing in their taxes each year. But when we can highlight the wonderful things that are happening and see how great the schools are doing and that we need to continue to sustain this work, it is a positive outlet for that. But I also think we need to use as many resources as we have, and sometimes finding grant monies Another area that I feel we were successful, again, working with my community liaison, we forged a relationship with the Chamber of Commerce in the area, and I would attend the Chamber of Commerce meetings at oftentimes to try to engage them to come and help support the schools. We had a lot of volunteer donations because I didn't have any line item for family engagement, nor did I have a line item for safety. So I had to get very creative in utilizing the resources around me. And I do think that's an asset that I can bring to Gloucester. Is the hard part is when you're always asking the same people for more. But I think the more that they see the work that you're doing and that you're showing how positively it's impacting, they're typically willing to come out and support the school. And yes, when budget time comes and the town may not have the funds and we need to sustain more funds, the more we can bring people in ongoing and not have to wait until that crunch time when we're short on funds and we need to add programs, it's almost too late then. That's something that should be happening all along throughout the whole 5-year cycle. I also think having a strategic plan, I see that you have a district improvement plan and we did as well, but I feel a 5-year strategic plan, as you've had in the past, is more sustainable, and then tying that to the budget cycle so that as the community stakeholders come and do that work with us and we develop that plan and we all see what our goals and objectives are to end up within 5 years, then there are no surprises for the town. If we've all agreed that this is where we want to get, and these are the budgetarily, if we develop a 5-year plan that ties into that, then we're more likely to be successful if it's been a community involvement process versus each year starting over with that process. I do think that 5-year cycle is far better, and we've been more successful with that in my previous district, but we never tied it with we never tied the budget, professional development, our technology plan, and all of our other plans together for the 5-year cycle. And I think that's really important, critical work that I would want to do with Gloucester as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Melissa has the next question. We're running behind on time, so I'm going to have to limit some of the follow-up questions. If we have some time at the end, we can open it up for a little more of a discussion. So, Melissa?
And I'll try to be more succinct.
Melissa?
Thank you. So my question to you is about your relationship with the school committee. We're a school committee that meets every 2 weeks. I'm sure you've looked into that, plus your subcommittee meeting. So my question to you is, the roles and responsibilities of school committees and superintendents are sometimes clear and sometimes ambiguous. For example, budget approval versus budget implementation, or personnel policy and finance versus personnel administration, or even dealing with parents and teachers with the concerns of complaints. The question is, can you describe some situations where the roles and responsibilities have challenged you and how you would work to address them if you were to be our superintendent?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you pick me to be your superintendent, we have to begin to build that trust and respect for one another. You know, as I mentioned earlier, there may be times that we have to agree to disagree on things, but as a superintendent, I need your support. This is something we're all in this together. And if there is that tension, whether in front of the camera or behind the scenes, it's never good for the school district. And the other piece is, you know, I really feel that, you know, when you pick a superintendent of schools that you think has the right skills, and I certainly think I do have the skills that would really support Gloucester in a positive manner, we have to really stand together solidly and support one another. You know, as I mentioned, the principal, and more than one principal had said to me that they might not be happy with the decision I had made because it wasn't what they had wanted. And staff members have said that at times. They've also said that they were a wonderful decision they were happy with, but there are times when they may not have liked or wanted the decision that I had to make based on what I had in my hands. That being said, if you know that someone is skilled at what they do, passionate about the work that they do, like myself, and I'm in it for the long haul, then I'm really, my passion goes well beyond, and it's something that I really want to sustain for a long time. I think it's important to invest yourself in the community that you work in. So that being said, I hope that you would trust me to do my job successfully and not micromanage me, because I don't believe in micromanaging my staff as well. However, it's important that I make sure that I'm communicating effectively to you on an ongoing basis, so that if there are imminent things that are happening on social media, I don't want to be finding out from you. I want to be finding out from the staff first and bringing it to you so that we can help problem solve together and deal with situations. However, there have been times, you mentioned, have I ever had to deal with situations that were challenging? One of the areas that I have found challenging in my role as personnel is, as you know, there are many confidential things that come across the desk of an assistant superintendent or a superintendent. And I am legally bound not to share certain information. I've had a lot of legal training. I feel like maybe I could be a lawyer at this point just because I've had so much training. And unfortunately or fortunately, I've had to deal with many investigations. Whether it's with children, sexual assault, many different areas. And I have had to work through situations with personnel that staff members may not have returned to the district for various reasons. There have been times I have been asked by a predecessor or a school committee member to share information that I could not share. I've had to politely explain that I could not share that. And that being said, I will share the most amount I can, but I won't overshare because at that time I could be putting the district in severe jeopardy of legal action. And also it's my job to protect the staff and students as well. So we have to set boundaries and trust one another to do our jobs. But I do think that I've had great opportunities to meet with success in that area. One particular area I did work on, I was always helped negotiate all of the contracts. At one time, I was the only administrator that was the common administrator to all 7 union contracts. And I started to ask the school committee if I could not have a lawyer present at the meetings because I felt like it was slowing down the process. We were caucusing too much. And because I had built the rapport and trust, they did say that, yes, they would allow me to facilitate that process. Well, I took on a lot by trying to do all of those roles, but I did feel it was much more successful. They wouldn't have given me that opportunity if they didn't trust me, but they had seen my work over time. And I will say it saved us not only a lot of money, but a lot of headaches. And we were able to build a rapport with staff because I asked that we talk a lot more at the table and asking questions rather than leaving the room and caucusing in those situations. So I've developed a lot of skills in that area. But again, over time, clear and consistent expectations and me being consistent with the work that I was doing, I was able to build that trust and that rapport so that they did allow me to do my job and trusted me to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy, you have the next question?
Okay, my question has to do with budgeting. So the question is, what is your view of the role of the superintendent vis-a-vis the district's chief financial officer? In other words, how do you build a budget, monitor the district's finances, and develop a good reporting system? I'd also like you to comment, given what you've known, what you've learned about Gloucester in our district, how would that knowledge influence your process?
Well, I think the process that I believe in using is not unique to Gloucester, but I do think that I certainly have to take into consideration some of the things that are happening there. As I mentioned, certainly your enrollment is something that we need to consider in the budget process, as well as the building projects that you're involved with at the time. Combining schools, sometimes there is a savings in staff when you're combining schools. You're able to adjust your use of staff and schedule more successfully. So there are times when that can actually be a cost savings, and I've had that happen when we've combined certain programs. That being said, as far as the budget process, I believe it is not a, I believe it's a collective process. And the way I've been involved in it, I've sat on the budget subcommittee with school committee for the nighttime meetings. But before we even started that, I mean, as you know, the budget process has become a year-round process. Typically, school opens, and then by October, you're already thinking about the next year's budget, planning accordingly, and having meetings throughout the year. But the first meetings that we would have as a team at central office were, we met with each principal, went through line item by line item through their budget, asked them to prioritize all their needs as you would do so. We'd meet with all 12 principals that way, director of athletics, same thing, coordinator of health services, all of our department heads and transportation, food services, whatever department needs were necessary. And then as a collective team, the leaders would go through the entire budget, and then we would, before we had our nighttime meetings with our school committee, we would then try to prioritize based on all of the buildings, because you're never going to be able to prioritize everything. And we would put together our list of priorities for the school committee to plan for. And then at the nighttime meetings, we invited our various department heads to present their budget. And as you know, special education is one that can be a very flexible budget, or unfortunately or fortunately, it becomes something that needs to have flexibility because needs arise throughout the year. And because I have the special education background, that was an area that I was able to help the district in many ways. We had, when I arrived in my district previously, we had a lot of support staff that had been added, but nobody had really gone through each program to see the needs. And because I had a lot of experience, I started meeting with each team chair, each principal, as well as our special education administrator. And we literally went 3 times a year with each building, tried to go through each program and making sure that we were using our staff effectively. And I was able to reduce our paraprofessional load, not because we were just trying to save money, but because it was in the best interest of students first. And then that allowed us to try to build back some positions that were more essential at the time, and we had not been able to build into the budget because we were spending money sometimes in the wrong areas. So I do think the fact that I have that special education background, as well as the general education, the personnel areas and curriculum areas, I've been able to be very sort of look at the whole budget versus the isolated budget, and realize that sometimes the overarching priorities or the competing priorities can be very challenging. And I think that the insights I've been able to develop have allowed me to help work with the superintendent and prioritize the needs more successfully. So as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, in the coming years, I do see that given your changes demographically and also your changes in the enrollment that I've heard has been a concern, I feel like this is where it would be a really great time to do a 5-year strategic plan so that you can incorporate all of these things into the long-term budget planning as well. And then once we are able to prioritize the needs of the district for the 5-year plan, tying that to professional development and technology needs and other building needs is really critical as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is mine. Gloucester is about to submit the schematic design to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for a new elementary school, which will house a consolidation of 2 smaller elementary schools. If approved by MSBA, Gloucester will have to secure our part of the funding with a debt exclusion override vote. No. Are you in favor of consolidation? And if so, how would you make that case to the public?
Well, given I've looked at your populations, you have some smaller buildings, some larger buildings, and I always find it interesting. In my district, I had the same issue. I had a building with as small of a number as 168 students, and then another elementary school had 400 plus students. So anytime we can improve equity and equitable experiences for students, I'm in favor of it. So if the result of combining those 2 schools allows for more of that equity, and the reason I'm saying, because if you look at those smaller buildings that I mentioned, sometimes when you have 1 class of first graders or 2 classes of first graders in one building, that's where sometimes scheduling does get challenging, and sometimes we have a lot of gaps in schedules, and sometimes our support staff are in one building and they're not able to reach the needs of another building. So when we can combine students in a way that they can be successful and sustain the programs over time, I'm in favor of it. And it does seem like the plan here would move in that direction. I'm also in favor of the fact that when you have these really small pockets, as I mentioned, and then you have the larger pockets, when you start to combine the schools and have buildings that are getting closer to being similar in size, then you are able to provide more equitable experiences. And I'll give an example. I mentioned that one of the areas that we identified was really lacking is we had lost all of our adjustment counselors with a budget many years ago in Weymouth. And we lost all of our STEM coaches, or actually STEM teachers at the time, as well as any literacy or math coaches we had identified as a need. When you have very small buildings and you're trying to portion out for equity for buildings, it's very hard scheduling wise to try to have staff sharing multiple buildings. We did do it, but then there's a lot of wasted time by traveling and so forth. So I'm in favor of being able to identify the support roles and the staff that will be able to best meet the needs of students. And if that is, if by combining student populations, we're able to do that effectively, which I think you can do, I'm in favor of that. However, I'm not in favor of just combining it for, and I'll give you an example. When we had some really budget constraints and lost a lot of staff, the district went from 2 5 through 8 buildings for middle school, and the middle school buildings became a 5 6 building and a 7 8 building. Well, the reason that happened was not about what was best for students. It was about a way to sustain programs and sustain staff. And it was a scheduling thing that we could reduce staff and manage the students in a 5-6 building and a 7-8 building. 10 years later, there were still concerns with that model. And I'm happy to say Weymouth is building a new middle school and is moving to a different model. But the decisions, we should be making decisions about what's the best interest of the students that we're serving versus solely what's budgetarily sustainable, because I worry that we make sometimes decisions for students that are negatively impactful, and I always try to be proactive and positively impact.
Thank you. Next question is Laura's.
So we know that all kids can learn, but not all do learn. To what extent is their ability to learn and our ability to serve them a function of curriculum and good classroom instruction, and/or a function of good finances and emotional support? And what can you as superintendent do to improve the outcomes students have? And have you done this elsewhere?
Sure, and I think it's all of the above. I mean, programs are effective because we have the right support staff, we have the right student ratios, we have the right curriculum in place, we have the right resources in place, and the properly trained, effective teachers in place. So all of those things are important. If I'm making a recipe of what to do best for students, it's a dash of all of that combined. That being said, I do feel the fact that I had intense curriculum training. I've done a lot of training of staff because I was a teacher in multiple grade levels from 1st grade all the way through 8th grade, and then did a lot of professional development with our 9 through 12 staff as well. I feel like I have that oversight of the progression of students as they build their literacy and numeracy skills. And I think a lot of superintendents are lacking in that area when they have sometimes particularly just a finance background or just one, maybe a general education, because I have that special education lens as well, general education. And I think that that's important to be able to have that oversight and understanding of how all these things connect so that we can serve the best interests of the students in our programs. So I feel that a superintendent, the role is very diverse. There are a lot of competing needs that the superintendent has on their plate. However, first and foremost, I am an education leader. I spent 25 years honing my skills, developing my expertise, having that passion for teaching and learning, loving students, loving to help and support and grow staff, all of those things. But I also have a strong background in that operational oversight, the personnel oversight, which is really helpful to me, and it's been able to help me build strong programs. One of the areas that I felt was really important to focus on, both in my curriculum leadership role and then when I moved into my personnel role as well, we were building an RTI model in Hanover, and then I had Title I funds available to me in Weymouth. And as RTI kind of changed, I feel like it's the same thing in a way, but mass tiered system of supports were in place. I identified in my Title I budget that we were somehow supplanting some of the programs we were supposed to be funding in the regular budget and shouldn't have been funding from the Title I budget. So I worked with my Title I coordinator, and we took those funds and moved them back so that they were really working for Title I students. And the funding was not as lucrative as we would like. So I asked if we could build back these, I called them MTSS interventionists. So these interventionists work somewhat in a tutorial role, but they supported classroom teachers by being able to do Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And I was very happy that the superintendent supported my work in that area. And we were able to bring back little by little a 0.5 interventionist to each of the elementary buildings, a 1.0, and over time each building was getting equitable supports there. Then I moved on to our middle school, and I worked with our 2 middle school 5, 6, and 7, 8 principals, and we built back so that we had 2 literacy interventionists and 2 math interventionists each of their buildings. That model was starting to move very successfully because they were support staff that weren't doing the direct instruction. They were doing small group support in other times of the day. So that model, I think, is something that really, certainly I'm sure you have some of those supports in place, but I would love to look into that model more and see if we could put some more efforts into it. Because I do think over time, they're not teachers, so they're not getting the same high salaries as I'm sorry, not high, but the same salaries as teachers. So we can sometimes fund them through a budget like a Title I, but it was a very successful model. And we were able to get some very successful staff members to take these roles In many cases, some of them did end up being hired as teachers when other roles opened. So it was a win-win because we were able to sustain them in the district long term. But in the short term, we saw a lot of data increases and gains because of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Samantha, you have the next question?
I actually feel like Dr. Kiska has answered this question. So in the interest of time, I'm happy to move on, and I can ask a different question at the end if there's time.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So Joel, you're up.
Thank you. So I'd like to just hear your thoughts on the use of the MCAS testing as an evaluation tool for students, an evaluation tool for teachers, and an evaluation tool for districts.
Well, I have mixed feelings, I'll be honest with you. Having been a teacher when MCAS was employed, and I recall being a somewhat newer teacher at the time, and I remember when it was just being rolled out in the first year, I believe we piloted it, and the next year it was moving in a different direction. And I remember some of my colleagues who had been there for many, many years, some of them were getting closer to retirement and were not in favor of this change. It was a big change for someone that had been teaching for 30, 40 years at the time. For me, I was just open to exploring what the assessment would be like. And I remember colleagues of mine saying, oh, this will go away too. Well, it hasn't gone away. So I don't see that it's going away over time. Has it changed? Yes. The way we rank our students, the way we show their growth, I am in favor of the fact that we've moved away from the solely looking at the students' scores and whether they've, what level they're at. I am glad that we added that student growth percentage so that we can see the growth over time as more of a realistic measure of student growth. That being said, it's one tool, and I don't want to ever over rely on that tool. I've certainly had to present our MCAS data in various times to our school committee, and there's always a way to look at and see what's going well and what's not happening well because of our data. But it paints a very limited picture over time. And to me, I think we need to be looking at more broad assessments, certainly common assessments that teachers are doing. I like to see students doing more portfolio assessment. There are some portfolios we can put in place that start when the students are in kindergarten and travel all the way along from school to building throughout their whole individual growth, and we can measure that over time. I think those are great, a lot of work, but I think they really measure a lot more holistically what a child is accomplishing. But I think it's even beyond that. One of the things I feel that districts don't do enough of is that longitudinal data. What is happening when students leave Gloucester? Not just, are they going to four-year college? Are they going to two-year college? I can see all of that data on DESE. We can all see where students are going. How many are going to military? How many are maybe not graduating? How many are taking 5 years? But what's happening 5 years out? Did they graduate from that four-year college? Did they get a successful career? Are they being successful adults? And what's happening 10 years out? If there's a way to gather that research so that we really get a long-term view of how successful are our students, not just while they're in the Gloucester Public Schools, but what's happening when they leave Gloucester schools. How are they impacting the global environment that they're growing into? I know that we do some, the state does some longer term viewing of these percentages of kids graduating from college and so forth, but how many of them actually get into a career that they're sustaining from the opportunity they had in both Gloucester and college and beyond? How many of them are going into lucrative careers based on their comprehensive experience? I think we have a harder time gathering that data. I have a husband that went to a comprehensive, actually went to a South Shore Collaborative, and he's done very successfully with his own business. How, are we gathering that data to see all of the successes that our students are happening? I think that paints a much better picture. And also sometimes the mental health areas, when we look at some of the trauma that our students are experiencing throughout their lives, how many students when they leave Gloucester are getting into opportunities that shows that they have not benefited social emotionally or been impacted negatively that way. There's so much work that can be done, and it's probably a lot of effort to sustain that work. But I do think MCAS can be a limited view, an isolated view, and certainly we are in a business to educate students, and we need federal and state funds to do so. So we are obligated to have our students assessed with MCAS. I just hope that that's not the only assessment that we rely on. There are much broader. Having ongoing assessments such as DIBELS is important for our younger students. At the high school level, there are some assessments we can do online, but looking at all of those things and being able to, this is where you have statisticians. I'm not a statistician, but I've worked very closely with accountability people, and they do a great job at combining all of those things and taking that one MCAS, but really looking at all of these other tools and how they show the overall growth of a student, not in a limited, isolated way, is really critical. And again, I really would like to see that you're looking even beyond high school and what kind of gains the students are having and being successful citizens overall over time.
Thank you. Melissa, you have the next question.
So there's a follow-up question to the budget that I'd like to be able to ask. It's a quick question if I get the opportunity at the end. So my next question is about collective bargaining. What is the best role of the superintendent in collective bargaining, in your opinion? What are your experiences at the table? And I know you've touched on that a little bit already. How would you propose that we use the collective bargaining process to promote student achievement as well as control our expenses?
Yeah, it's always a challenge because as an educator myself, I'm a strong supporter of teachers, and I have a daughter who started teaching this year. Talk about being a first-year teacher in the middle of the pandemic. What an eye-opening experience for her, but I've supported her. It took me a long time to convince her what a great teacher she would be. So she's a late bloomer to the field, but I'm very happy that she did follow finally in my footsteps. So that being said, I certainly am a strong supporter of teachers. I did that role for 15 years. I loved it, but I also saw that I had these strong leadership skills that I wanted to be able to motivate and mentor and lead other people to be successful as teachers as well. So in the collective bargaining experience, I think that's really where, I'm talking a lot tonight. And if you ask my husband, he'll tell you that I do talk a lot. But I've learned, one of the things I've learned as a leader is taking the time to truly listen well and to ask a lot of questions. And that's both in the budget process as well as the collective bargaining process. In my previous role, I mentioned that I was the common leader in all the 7 negotiation and all the collective bargaining agreements that we had. And because of that, I was able to build trust over time. And I felt that we were able to save and make some successful changes over time that were beneficial to the district, but also supported teachers in their roles and supported staff in their roles as well. It's a balance. It's not a perfect science, but one of the things that, as I mentioned, sometimes I think we get very bogged down in the minutia and don't ask the right questions. So when I asked the school committee if I could facilitate the process, they were not really interested in interest-based bargaining. I guess prior to my role there, they had had some negative experience with it at one time in their careers. So they weren't in favor of that. However, I do feel, for those of you that are familiar with that some of the tools that I employed as a facilitator, in my opinion, reminded me of interest-based bargaining, where both parties that were engaged in the process would discuss what they needed to have happen or what they felt was best for the district to have happen. And then we had to negotiate, as you do in negotiations, and discuss ways that we could come to an agreement that would benefit both the district, the students, and the staff overall. I think one of the things that I felt was very, very worthwhile in that process for me is by listening and hearing over time the concerns. The staff got to the point, particularly in our smaller bargaining units, I remember that we had some real housekeeping issues in some of the language in our agreements were so outdated and was actually negatively impacting the district, both monetarily, but it also wasn't in the best interest of staff the way things were worded. Because I had been able to build some trust, I recall both my custodians and my maintenance staff in particular, they would come to me and say, Susan, the staff is interpreting this part of the contract this way, and this is what we think it means, what do you think it's supposed to mean? And we were able to meet and clean up the language together, and then we would propose that language to the school committee and the superintendent to see if we could all come to a consensus on that. What I found is when we actually got to the actual full collective bargaining process, by dealing with those small details along the way, we were able to really narrow down and focus on, as you know, monetary pieces often are the biggest piece of that, puzzle, but I was able to kind of clean up some of the small things along the way by building that trust and rapport with staff, so that when we came to the real important work that we had to do, we could make it be more productive and more proactive versus being reactive and getting people angry over things that didn't need to lead to that area. So yes, I do have a lot of experience in that, and it's not my favorite thing to do, because I feel like sometimes I don't like that tension that can exist and result from that. But I've had a lot of experience at this point and been able to build some of that trust. So some of the union leaders on the committees would say to me, I'm glad that you've taken over this role for us, because we feel like we trust you and we can trust you to help us do the right thing. And, you know, I'm there for the school committee. I'm there for the students. I'm there for the staff. It can't be about one piece of that puzzle. We have to all work together collectively and do what we can do that we can do within the budget that we're allotted from the town. You know, so I guess I won't say more than that. I certainly can handle that area, and I will do so successfully in Gloucester so that we minimize any negativity as a resulting of the overarching budgets and collective bargaining.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Kathy, you have the final question.
Okay, the final question. Across different levels of the district, describe how you will know whether professional development programs and initiatives have affected the knowledge, skills, and practices of educators in the district.
Well, I'll give you an example of something that I think was in one of my experiences. I won't get too specific, but it was eye-opening to me when I was doing some work with some of my principals came to me, and each building was a little bit different. And, you know, we certainly have non-negotiables. As someone that did curriculum, worked heavily in curriculum and professional development with staff early on in my leadership career, in my opinion, there are certain non-negotiables that we need to have from building to building so that we have equity for students throughout the district. We shouldn't be having markedly more resources at one building than another, so that students are getting inequitable experiences and aren't getting the bare minimum tier 1 support that they should all be getting. However, I think sometimes our building principals do a great job within their own building, seeing some things that aren't necessarily a district concern, but specific to that building. And I can remember one of my principals had identified a way to support her staff by, it was through a very clever scheduling, and she was able to give them a little bit more support from some of the support staff she had in the building, and it was benefiting her for math and literacy skills for the students. At the district level, there was a concern that this person was not following the district protocol, and they wanted it specific to a certain way. An individual wanted it to be 100% equitable in a certain area. Well, when the person was told she could not do the work at her building that was actually being successful, her students started to decline. And even though her students started to decline, the person was not willing to let go of the agenda and see that sometimes it can't be exact. We have to be able to see the individual differences at each building. And I just recall that particular principal coming to me very much worried that something she had implemented in her building that was being very successful was now taken away because we had to be all exactly the same. So how do we get that equity so that we have those? I do believe, as a curriculum person, I had to make sure that when I had 2 elementary buildings or 4 elementary buildings, there are some minimal expectations that we all should be doing so that students are going into, whether it be middle school or from middle schools into high school, that they're getting the bare expectation that they all have had some similarities. I never want to see, which I did sometimes hear, I can tell those students came from that school because they don't have this, or I can tell those students came from that school because they have this background. It shouldn't be that drastic that we see students that have isolated skills that are giving them sometimes weaknesses in certain areas. So I do want that equity. However, I do believe in empowering our teachers, and I believe in empowering our leaders to make solid decisions for their classrooms and solid decisions for their buildings, because they are the experts that are in the trenches doing that work. If it's not working, the data will show that, and then we might need to revamp it together. But I do feel that that's where a superintendent has to trust the people that they work with to do their jobs well. I can't be everywhere, and if I try to do everybody else's job well, I'm not going to be successful at mine. Identifying those, as I mentioned earlier, key players and key leaders in the district that have certain strengths that help to balance the strengths that I have and the weaknesses that I have is really important. and trusting them to do their job is as critical to that, because we need to be a team and we need to be collective. And if I keep overstepping decisions that are happening at the building level, then I'm not going to build that trust and that respect that I've alluded to that is very important to me.
Okay, that concludes the original questions. Samantha, we've got a few minutes here, not a ton, but and we want to give an opportunity to make a closing statement. But did you have you had a question that you wanted to follow up on?
Yeah, so my original question was sort of a broad question in relation to commitment to equity, which I think you've spoken quite often too. So I guess more specifically, special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, service needs, and student and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs, what are some of the criteria you use?
Sure. Well, I guess I'm going to use the word that I didn't mention earlier when I talked about equity, but social justice is really an important part of the work that I've done during my dissertation and my doctoral program, but also work that I've tried to sustain in my work as a leader. And that led to a lot of the decisions I made. You know, I mentioned earlier that I worked in a district that was more diverse and larger than Gloucester, with 25% students of color, and hadn't seen an increase in that area, as well as we had a lot of homeless students because we were close to an urban area, and we had a lot of transient students and a lot of our English language learners. As a leader, I saw some of that, the inequity and bias present in the classes that I would travel. One of the things that is really important for me is to be highly visible in the classrooms. And again, I'm there to observe, not to judge. I'm there to learn. I'm there to problem solve with our leaders and in our buildings and support our staff. But one of the things I did frequently is I had 12 buildings, so I scheduled my entire year by making sure that I was visiting each week at least 3 to 4 buildings, so that in a 3-week rotation, I had been in all 12 buildings. And it was challenging. One of our buildings was a 1/4 mile long with, I'm trying to think, about 1,800 students. And then we had buildings as small as 168, which were much easier to get through. But special education was one of the areas that I spent a lot of time delving into because I saw a lot of inequity there. And for me, having been a special educator, it's really about that least restrictive environment and making sure that we've had the children move through the continuum. One of the things that I identified early on in my career, as I mentioned, that there was some inequity with student and staffing ratios. In some cases, I would walk into a substantially separate program and staff would literally walk out of the room because in some cases, we had almost as many staff as students. Now, our physically challenged students, children that were very disabled and fragile, there are different needs that I do see different staffing ratios for that. And sometimes we were bringing in 1-to-1 nurses for some of our students. But many students do not need a 1-to-1 paraprofessional supporting them throughout the day. And in some cases, I was seeing students go from a more inclusive environment with paraprofessional support, and then they'd go into a more restrictive environment, and they would still have the paraprofessional travel with them, even though there was support in the program that they were in. I was a strong proponent of making sure we look at, as we move our child along that more restrictive environment, that we're also not restricting them dually by now adding more staff on top of them so that they're not able to be doing their best work. And that was the area, as I mentioned earlier, that because it was a concern of mine, I worked very closely with our team chairs, principals, and special administrator to see if there was a way to not be as restrictive on our students and try to build some programs that were getting more students into inclusion. And we did that particularly in our kindergarten population. We identified that we were sometimes putting our students into more restrictive programs too early on. And even though that my role was more from the personnel lens, I had a lot of input when it came to staffing. I was able to work and very strategically move staff around so that we could meet the best needs of all of our students and not over restrict them so that they couldn't. The goal is for them to be the most successful as they can when they leave our schools. And part of that, as I mentioned, that least restrictive piece, as students move along the pendulum and throughout their grades, the goal, in my opinion, is always to try to pull back some of the support so that when they leave high school, that they've had opportunities to be more successful. Hopefully they can go into some type of a career or some type of support program beyond high school, despite their cognitive ability or their physical impairments. Again, as a superintendent, I would work very closely with the special ed administration and team because I would never want to take over the role that they are doing for our district, but I do think it's a very collaborative role that we need to handle together, because fortunately, unfortunately, special education is a very costly part of our budget. So we want to make sure we're being very strategic and strategically meeting the best needs of our students in that process. As I mentioned earlier, I sometimes saw that we had staff that were in buildings, and because sometimes we saw a decline in certain programs, but the same number of staff were remaining. I like to look at each program each year and see if we can shift things so that one program might have increases and we can shift staff around in that manner. And I also think it's important that we try to make sure that the staff that are working in one building, as much as possible, can transition up to the next level with the student if they've been successfully meeting the needs of that student in their roles in the previous building. So I may have missed part of your question. I apologize for that, but I think you can tell that I'm very passionate about special education. I think it's very important, but it's even more than special education. To me, it's about all students and meeting the needs of all of our diverse learners. When I did my SEI endorsement for our ELL population, I felt that the training you do for SEI endorsement for ELL students is very similar to the training I had as a special educator. And I think that type of training is important for all of our staff, because I want students to have success with their math content teachers and their English content teachers and so forth. And our special education teachers aren't always trained specifically in those areas. So in a perfect world, to have dual certified staff is always a goal of mine. Anytime when I was hiring and I'd meet with a staff member for the high school, for example, and they'd say they were math certified, being a math teacher, but they also had that special ed training, I was very excited, because I really feel that helps us to be well-rounded and meet the needs individually of our students. And I think it's something holistically that can benefit the district as a whole.
Melissa, you had a follow-up question?
I have a follow-up question to the budget question, and it shouldn't be a long answer at all. So while you were answering the question, you talked about competitive priorities. So you are one of our candidates that has experience in CTE, which we have here at Gloucester High. Can you give me an example or tell me your experience in how when you built your budget, how was the equity distributed between traditional education versus CTE and vocational education?
That's an area that I did have to get up to speed on, because I hadn't been in a comprehensive district before that, so I didn't have a lot of experience. And because of that, I made sure to spend a lot of time in our CTE programs. We had 12 different programs at the time, and I was able to help our curriculum leader actually was able to get a grant to build a robotics program in the district. But finding the staff for that was a huge challenge, because many people aren't certified in that area, because it's multifaceted getting the vocational license. But so that was a challenge that I saw with the personnel part of it. But I would walk into a lot of these programs, and as you know, sometimes the numbers look smaller because the classes have the component of the curriculum piece, but then they also have the hands-on experience. And I soon got up to speed very quickly that I was the one that was able to help the district understand the programs and the needs of those programs as well. What I first saw was that we really weren't changing the budgetary piece for those programs. It was very minimally changing from year to year, because each year we try to get by with what we had in that. And I had a CTA director that she came in and did some wonderful things in the district, and she came to me, and we met frequently, asking me if I could help her build and support some of her programs. So that became, one of those competing priorities that I mentioned was very important, because those students were getting opportunities coming out of high school. I felt that the thing that she and I tried to build was those students coming out now have an opportunity to have a career right out of high school. But in addition, some of those students may go to college and use that career to help them to fund college. So I felt like all of our students benefit from those programs. And one of the things she asked me to help her do was, could we add some more electives for our students so that our general education students might be able to take an elective in her department, but not be able to take the whole program. And as you know, those programs can fill up very quickly, and sometimes students don't get their choices. And I find that very frustrating. So I really want to look and dig into the numbers there and see, over time, have you had programs that are starting to decline? Are there priorities that we might need to be shifting? But I have the passion and the excitement and the enthusiasm for the program, so I would love to delve into that. And I definitely think that we need to make sure that we're incorporating as much STEAM I also like to see that we can try to support some of our female students and get them into the more of the STEM offerings, because we know that traditionally our female students are not getting into STEM careers as much as our male students. So again, I would want to look through all the programs. I certainly don't have enough data in front of me at this time to make decisions on that, but I did look at the programs, and I think you have some great programs going on, but I have no idea how many students are in each program and which programs are sustaining over time. Are there changes and modifications that we might need to make? That could be possible, but I would certainly want to work with the principal and the director of the department to see if we could move and try to build some even stronger programs moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you asked that question. I was thinking that we needed to touch on vocational. Dr. Kumpf, would you like to just wrap up? I'd like to thank you very much. It's our intention here is we have 4 more interviews to do this week. We are going to probably convene at the end of the week and try to cut it down to maybe 2 or 3, and then we're going to do another round. So thank you for leading off, and it's your chance to just sum up your your whole thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. I certainly am excited. You know, I had some fond memories as a child, not too frequently because we only had 1 car, and for sometimes we didn't have a car at all when I grew up in Dorchester. But I do remember some day trips that my father took me down to Gloucester, and I just always, you know, I'm certainly an ocean person and love the area, and I would love to be part of that community and really be immersed in the community, more so than just the school, but getting to be able to know the community and the stakeholders and build some strong relationships so that I can sustain the role of superintendent for a very long time. I do think that I have a lot to offer your district. I certainly, you know, again, I'm not perfect. We all have our weaknesses, but I feel that I'm probably one of the most well-rounded persons that would be successful in these roles. Certainly my special education background, general education background, I've worked with multiple grade levels. I've trained many staff from pre-K through 12. I've worked on the budget, collective bargaining, staffing, hiring. I've hired many, many administrators, and I'm far more comfortable sitting on your side of the table, interviewing those administrators for their positions and visiting them at their sites than I am sitting in the role right now. That being said, I have a passion for this. My desire is truly to make a difference for children. And even though I've worn many different hats over time, I've always jumped in with my full intentions of whatever role I'm in, what can I do to make a difference in the lives of children in a positive way? That's what I'm all about. And I feel that I can be certainly a strong leader. I think, as I mentioned earlier, having a strong female leader in these times when there's still a lot of bias in many gender bias, but also there's many areas of bias for students culturally, religion, all of the areas that we see concerns. I think if we can have strong female leaders in roles such as this, I do feel that our male students and female students and our male and female staff benefit from that, and we learn to trust and respect one another. I also think it's important in this role that we start to develop discussions about bias, because I do see that the bias that is present in our communities, and this is not specific to Gloucester, this is not a judgment on Gloucester in any way, I've seen it in every district I've worked in, then we need to start discussing that implicit bias. And until we start having those difficult conversations with our staff and helping them to unearth their biases, some of the work that I've done myself, we will never be able to get to that social justice that I talk about and try to have those equitable opportunities for students if we're not willing to have those difficult conversations and help educate one another so that we can be more proactive, be more supportive of all the, certainly your demographics are changing in the district, and we need to make sure that all of our demographics are getting positive experiences and the data that they leave school with and how they sustain their programs, I should say their careers after they leave the district, as well as going into college and military and careers is really critical. We don't want to see that inequity. I'm all about that. Anything I could do to help support the programs would be, I certainly would jump in and take this work very seriously and very passionately. But I do think that my background and the depth and breadth of my experience is very well-rounded, and I don't think there would be anything that you could throw at me that would really shock me or scare me. I'll just take it very seriously and problem solve and do what's best for your district and for the students that are in Gloucester. So thank you again for this opportunity. It's, these Zoom interviews are probably a little bit more awkward for all of us because it's hard to really get the personal experience, but I do hope that you can see that my passion could really make a difference, and I still got a lot of years left and a lot of hard work ahead of me. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kuska. And we'll be in touch, and thank you very much. And we'll let you know at the end of the week where we're at. Okay.
Excellent. And thank you
Thank you.
so much again. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay. We got about a half an hour before we start again. I think probably the best way would be to just go around the table and just talk about our impression of Dr. Kuska. I'm gonna have to work on that. Okay, Melissa, you want to go first?
Sure. So done a lot of interviews with a lot of candidates for superintendents, and I can say that I think, in my opinion, she's done very well. When you think about her responses, I think she answered questions. She never asked to repeat a question, usually answered the question and then answered another question that we were going to ask. She gave a lot of information. I found her to be very personable. She has a lot of experience. I like that she comes from a district that has vocational more than we do, but they have vocational. And so she has that experience, and she also has that certification, which is huge when it comes to running 4 programs in Gloucester where we do not have a program leader or the position that governs the vocational program. I thought she was pleasant, professional. She spoke clearly loves to talk and spoke well. She seems very approachable. She's a communicator. I loved going back to the vocational piece. She was all smiles when she talked about vocational, so that was a key for me. And I like that she wants to be very highly visible in the classrooms. And her discussion on biases really got my interest because that is a topic of concern in city leaderships around the state. So she talked about social, emotional, and trauma. I mean, she just hit everything. So it's going to be interesting to see how others compare or where we go with this. But I think she's a great candidate, and I'm glad she was put forward.
Samantha? Samantha, you want to go next?
Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, don't be sorry.
Okay. Still not used to this unmute thing. I think she was very authentic, which was really nice to see, and it's hard to convey via Zoom. So I think that's a skill that is not easily found. I think for me, the fact that she touched on implicit bias, equity, trauma without being led there was huge. We didn't even have to ask that question. So I think that was really important. She's definitely well-rounded. Her background in SPED and Gen Ed, collective bargaining, staffing. I mean, she checks all the boxes in having the experience that we're looking for. So I'm glad she's put forward.
Okay, Joel, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think to digest some of this, I thought she did a good job. This being my first go around interviewing superintendents, I don't have a whole lot to, gauge against, but I thought she was articulate, and I thought she demonstrated the knowledge of the various subject areas we were asking about. So, I don't have any eloquent observations at this time, but I have no complaints also.
Sapafia, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, I do. Wow, I found someone who talks more than I do is kind of, the fact is, yes, she did hit on all the points too. And I was looking over the resumes too, but some of the stuff that she did mention, in all fairness, we do have it here. Don't forget a lot of the stuff like with the police, and we have school resource officers, some of the stuff. So, I mean, that's great because she actually initiated in her school. So she'll be surprised if she does get hired of one of the wonderful programs we have here. we have a lot of wonderful programs. It just makes you appreciate too some of the work that the school committee and the schools and administration all working together. I mean, I'm listening to some of the stuff that she goes and, you know, what she was doing, especially I was very thrilled with the special needs and her standoff on that, because I'm sick and tired of people always just saying, you know, those people or this or that, you know how I feel about that. And so I was really impressed on that one. So can you imagine just of the community she worked in and some of the stuff that she did, if she could work in a community, you know, where we're already advanced in a lot of things, would be a powerhouse. Like I said, like Joel's too. I mean, this is my first time, so I'm keeping an open mind, and I'm just going to let you know that if she does get chosen, we better have an all-day meeting, because her and I both love to talk. So thank you.
Laura?
Yeah, I feel like this is the first interview, so I'm gonna say that I liked her. I thought she spoke very well and covered, as Melissa and Sam and Safathia said, and covered a lot of bases. And I'm sort of eager to keep an open mind and hear from everyone.
Okay, Kathy?
Yeah, I will agree with all the positive things that have been said so far. She definitely is very personable. I like that she has some experience in family engagement and seems to be creative about approaching things like that. I like that she talked about equity among our buildings, not necessarily the same, but to make sure that there's an acknowledgement that there are differences, but that we also have to have standards that keep everybody kind of with a similar educational experience. And I can't even go into her experience. She's done a lot of the aspects of the superintendent's job that are very important to us. So very, very good candidate.
Okay, I guess it's me. I thought she was very well-rounded. She has a lot of background. She started as a special ed teacher. She's worked in a district that has vocational programs. She's been done negotiations. She's done budget work. She's done academic professional development. She seems to, as Melissa said, or I think somebody said, she checked all the boxes. She talked a lot about equity, which is important. She talked about social justice, which shows her concerns about where we're going as a society. And I frankly was very impressed, and let's see where it goes. Unless anybody wants to talk some more, why don't we recess? It's 6:33. Why don't we take a break and take a recess until 5 minutes of 7.
Jonathan, can I just say something before I forget to say it before we begin again? If we could all mute when we're not speaking, because if people are unmuted, they somehow show up on this, they show up on the screen if they move a paper or they, something happens. So to give the candidate kind of that respect to have them on the screen for everybody, it's just.
Well, I keep it Brady Bunch style so I can see what all of you are up to.
Is that the way you do it?
Okay. So I'm trying to. What? Go
Jonathan,
ahead.
you're going to recess. Are we just going to stay on the Zoom, or we're going to be able to leave, or what?
Maybe Brendan can answer that question. I believe that you can leave and come back, but we got to keep it open.
That's correct. I'll be here.
So it's the same.
Yep.
It's the same meeting. Yeah, you just click again and join it again.
Well, because I have O&A going on right now, and I have the Essex County Commission for Women.
Yeah.
We're going to see if we can do something with domestic violence for these children that are stuck in quarantine. And I have this, so I get to leave. I can just.
Yep. And then when you come back, come back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to remember if we need to, I can just call a recess. We don't need a vote. So we will recess for roughly 20 minutes and return so everybody can go try to eat a little supper or something, and we'll see you in at 5 minutes of 7. So, thank you. Okay, it's 6:55. We're back in session. I think Laura's not here, is she? No. But does anybody?
I don't see Joel.
Okay. I don't see Joel or Laura. Well, did that go pretty much the way you expected, Dorothy?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I thought you had a good number of questions for the time so that the candidate was able to answer thoroughly without rushing.
All right. Good, good. All right, so. I don't know where they are, but. So we have Nan Murphy coming up at 7.
Kathy, I love how your cat is always in the background somewhere. She's in the back corner. Every time we're at a meeting, she's out. I don't know if it's a he or she, but it's always somewhere.
There's Laura. So we just need Joel. We can't hear you, Laura. You're muted.
I said it's bedtime in these parts, so it's a little busy.
Yeah. Well, at least you're there.
That's what I just said.
Okay. Okay. Okay, we're just waiting for Joel. Well, we'll give him another minute or two. Might be bedtime at his house too.
He said he's just about to log on.
Okay. So the good thing is that these are all recorded and they'll be available if you want to go back and review them. That's an opportunity. I got contacted by Studio 1623 today asking about the availability of these recordings. So I can't see any reason why we shouldn't release them to the local cable. Unless
Do you
somebody,
want to wait till all the interviews have been done so that the other candidates can't watch the first?
yeah.
Are they going to be on the website, city website immediately though, or are you waiting till they're all done? All the interviews are done.
Well,
Well, if you put them right up, there's no way for us to stop someone from watching them. So we can wait till the end of the week and then post them all together.
That's what I would suggest.
yeah.
But but people can be on them now. Anyone can be on them. The
Yeah.
candidate can be on them.
But it's an opportunity to see it. But it's what they wouldn't be able to do is go and look at it tomorrow and see what, review what got said. So I mean,
They could sort of do it anonymously if now you would sort of know someone was on.
yeah.
Right.
But if they could just watch it, then it would be anonymous.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the attendees to see who's there, so if they're watching, they're an attendee.
Do you want me to send a text to Nan? We ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. The text is sent, so give her a minute or two and she should pop in.
Good. Welcome, Ms. Murphy. This is the Gloucester School Committee. I'll start by just going around and we'll introduce ourselves. My name's Jonathan Pope. I'm the chairman of the school committee, and Melissa.
Hi, good evening. I'm Melissa Texera Prince, vice chair of the school committee. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy Clancy. I'm been on the school committee for a little over 10 years. Nice to meet you.
Great.
Safathia.
Donna, I'm sorry, too many Zooms. I'm shutting them all off. Mayor Taken, welcome, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the answers to the questions.
Thank you.
Joel.
Good evening. My name is Joel Famaza.
Samantha.
Hello, thanks for coming. I'm Samantha Watson.
And Laura.
Hi there, I'm Laura Wiesen. I'm the secretary of the school committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, the way we're going to do this is we have scheduled about an hour and maybe 20 minutes. If it goes over a little bit, there's nothing, we don't have anything after this. So
Okay.
except feeding the dog or whatever it is that we have to do.
Speak for yourself, thank you.
Oh, most of us, excuse me. We have one very busy person with us. We'll give you a little bit of time to do an introduction and talk about yourself, and then we have 12 questions that we will try to touch on different topics that we've determined that were expressed in the advertisement, so that we can get a read on your response to those. And we're going to allow follow-up questions by any of the committee members to any of the questions. And then we will have a little bit of time at the end for you to wrap up the interview as well. We have done one previous interview. We're going to be doing 3 more after this, and we will hopefully by the end of the week at least narrow it down to 2 or 3 candidates. We're just going to have to see it, how it goes, and then we'll do another round of interviews and site visits next week. So the floor is yours. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I consider it a privilege to have been considered thus far. So thank you very much. I am a lifelong educator. I have started my career in teaching. I taught for 16 years in Wilmington, Massachusetts, a suburb not far from where I live. And I was completely and utterly content in my position as a teacher. It wasn't until around my 8th year of teaching that I started to feel the impact that decisions made at the district level and at the administrative level in my school building, that how they would affect my ability and the content and some of the initiatives that I was able to execute in my classroom. And so at that point, I pursued a degree that would allow me to, in the future, go on and create a culture for teaching and learning as a building administrator that was more aligned with what my thinking was. So I did that, and I was very lucky to land in Lowell, Massachusetts, and very different demographic from the suburban environment. Came with a different set of challenges and assets. I started my career there and assumed the position of a principalship. It was the first time that our school leaders in the state were receiving data from the accountability process that really you were assigned a level status, and a level assigned to the school that I had just assumed responsibility for was high needs level 3. And at that time, the state was taking over level 4 schools. So we were, in fact, the lowest performing elementary school in Lowell. We were 14th out of 14. So we did have one other school in Lowell that year designated as a level 4. And so they started a turnaround process with $1 million allotted to them from the state. My school was tasked with the same process, and yet we were not privy to any funds because we were high needs level 3. So what I ended up doing was really building a team around a team culture. We had to take a real hard look at our instructional practices, the materials we were presenting kids with. We were at the time in the 6th percentile across the country. Across the Commonwealth. What I ended up doing was selecting 2 of the 11 essential conditions for effective schools, one being aligned instruction, and the second being effective instructional practices. And everything we did as a school was aligned to those 2 initiatives. And what ended up happening was in 4 years, so when our kindergarteners exited as 4th graders, we were deemed a level 1 school by the Commonwealth. And the Commissioner of Education, Mitchell Chester at the time, came by the McCullough School to interview my staff and myself and our leadership team to try to understand what we were able to do and how we were able to build capacity to do so right by kids without any additional funds. So it was a privilege to lead that school through such a rigorous process. After that, the superintendent of schools created a position at the district level for me, which was the director of accountability and school improvement. And the goal of that was to try to bring some of these practices to other schools in the district. In conjunction with that task, I was also responsible for professionally developing our district's 100 leaders. So I did all the professional development for building principals, assistant principals, directors, and assistant superintendents. So through that work as the director of accountability and school improvement, I was connected and worked with the Department of Education in their service to our 5 most underperforming schools. And through that work, I was offered the opportunity to come to the state level and work with districts going through similar struggles. So I am now with the Department of Education. I am what they refer to as an assistance lead. And I work under the statewide systems of support, and we go into districts that are struggling, and we work with administrative teams and teacher teams in co-constructing and looking at data and creating plans for sustainable improvement. And I love that work. And I enjoy the colleagues and all of the learning that has happened in the last year, but I am looking to reconnect with a district. So I'm in and out of districts, and I lead and facilitate a lot of the work, but I don't get to do the work. So I had a feeling that would happen, but I didn't want something that I was afraid of happening limit me from taking on something new. So I tried the position at the state, and I've learned a tremendous amount, but I am somebody that is driven by teams, and I like being part of the work and actually implementing the stages of the work. So I'm looking to reconnect in a district, and preferably in a district that fits my skill set, and that we can continue to learn. I can continue to learn good things that are happening in a district, but also be able to kind of activate some of my skill set and further grow a district that is struggling. So that's what kind of is leading me out of my current position and in seeking a district leadership position.
Thank you very much. Joel, you have the first question.
Thank you. And my apologies for the late start. That was on me. I was shuffling from location to location. So if you're getting nervous waiting, when are they going to text me?
No worries.
So this question can be answered based either on your understanding of the situation particular to the Gloucester School District based on your research so far, or also just based on trends in the Commonwealth affecting most districts. And the question is, what do you perceive to be the biggest or most pressing challenge facing our district that you will be able to make swift progress in addressing? And what is the biggest or most pressing challenge that will take the longest to overcome?
So I think given the scenario of our current remote situation, I think the most pressing issue facing your district and every district around the Commonwealth is, what is the academic day going to look like come August? And how do we prepare effectively and efficiently to meet the vast amount of needs that we are going to be faced? So that is one outstanding initiative that I think is going to most likely take priority over some other what traditional and typical priorities might be coming into a new district. I don't know if you have particular questions for me about that later, or if you want me to address that as a particular issue right now facing a district.
I mean, probably for the interest of time, we should probably put a pin in that and then
Okay.
hopefully time at the end to ask for, or one of the follow-ups is to address the specifics of how you would address that problem.
Okay.
It'd be interesting to hear the kind of long-term, what you see for our district.
Okay. So what the data that I've reviewed and Gloucester data, and in addition to the information that I've learned as a partner, state partner in the district, is that Gloucester is, from what I can tell, in need of some sort of vertical plan. That there doesn't seem to be a overarching constructed plan for instructional improvement and for improved student outcomes, whether that is, looking at different curriculum pieces, whether it's looking at social emotional, the unity across the district. There are achievement gaps in the Gloucester Public Schools. And so I think the priority for a new incoming superintendent would be to learn more about those achievement gaps and to develop a plan for what shifts in instruction can be made to move kids in the right direction. What kind of professional development needs to be connected with that? How do we communicate and gather that information from the teaching staff? How do we activate our school leaders in guiding that work? So it's a complex plan, but it's one that I feel it would be connected to being able to fill in some of those achievement gaps that are happening.
Thank you.
Any follow-ups on that? Okay, we're going to move on to Mayor Taken to ask a question about leadership. If she's here.
Jonathan, go right ahead. I'm on another Zoom. I'll be right back.
So can I use the vacant time here to follow up with Joel? I think a short-term kind of goal would be around building a network of communication and trying to determine both trying to gather information from the stakeholders in the community as far as initiatives and maybe what has started that's kind of lost steam, that's deemed important and valuable, or what's kind of on the agenda right now that isn't translating and there needs to be a shift.
Thank you. So Mayor Taken is tied up, but the question she was going to ask was, what are the 3 most important traits you possess as a leader? And how does that, how do you sometimes have to be pulled in different directions? Tell me about a time you made decisions that not everyone agreed with.
Okay. So I think some traits, I feel one of my strongest traits is I'm a very transparent and consistent communicator. So I feel that decisions that are made need to be communicated effectively so that everybody understands why a decision is made. And they may not always agree with it, but that they're able to understand the thinking behind it. also feel I'm very good at making connections and meeting people where they are with relationships. So I feel like I'm able to talk with a variety of people and help them process things that are happening in the educational setting. Feel like I'm good at using appropriate language for the audience. So if I'm communicating to a parent, I'm careful not to use acronyms and careful to explain things as a new person to education. So I feel like my relationship skills are very astute. And I feel one of my stronger attributes as a leader is I'm decisive. I don't stay in the realm or arena of decision making because it's uncomfortable to make a decision. And it prevents people sometimes from being able to make a decision and move on. I'm able to gather that information, make sure that that process is inclusive and that there's shared ownership of the conversation, that everybody who's a stakeholder in a particular decision area has had a say. And then I'm okay with making the decision. So to get to the point around making decisions where not everybody is on board, I think that is a pretty standard place for a superintendent to be. You can't always meet everybody exactly where they need to be in terms of a decision. Sometimes you have to go with what you think is best for kids and communicate that out. So the scenario that the mayor has asked me to speak to, is that, can you just rephrase that for me?
I can try.
Okay.
Let's see. I got what she was, leaders are often required to make difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about a time you made a decision that not everyone agreed with.
Okay. So I will speak to my work as the Director of Accountability and School Improvement. I was working with a school leader, a principal and an assistant principal, alongside the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction in Lowell. And this particular leader was really struggling with allocation of funds. So the spending wasn't aligned to a specific plan. It was, and there was a large amount of money that was allocated by the state for targeted improvement practices. And the purchases were not translating or even being able to be spoken to how that might help move kids along. So I made the decision to freeze the funds and to stop the spending and really have the building leader and assistant principal sit and co-construct a more targeted plan and think about how that spending could be done in a way that supports the plan. So it was a difficult decision, and it's hard to, as a school leader, a central leader, you want to support your principals and make sure they feel empowered. And this was a decision that I made based on, after kind of empowering the person and supporting them, it was clear that there wasn't, the capability wasn't there. And so I started kind of pulling the conversation back and ultimately ended up having to kind of freeze the funds to force the conversation to go a little bit deeper into what is the plan, why are we doing it, and how are kids how are we going to get improved student outcomes from this spending. So that was a tough conversation to have with the principal. It was a hard conversation to have with the team of teachers that were helping the leader inform that work. I stayed in that work with them. I didn't make the decision and then say, I'll be back. I really stayed in it and helped them construct that plan. And then we were able to move forward with some really targeted spending. But that was hard. That was a hard conversation, and on multiple levels. But it needed to happen, and I wasn't going to worry about what the conversation, the hard conversation. We were going to get through that piece, and we were going to come out the other side, and we did. We were able to.
Thank you. Samantha, you have the next question.
So what are the core values that drive you as an educator, and what core values would you want to see in the staff you hire?
I would say the core value that I have is that all students can make great gains, that given the correct amount of time and support, all students can. And that is a mindset that is critical to making sure that we scaffold information for students, and we don't undermine the kids that are struggling, that we really are diverse in our teaching abilities, that we are able to scaffold learning, that we are able to teach strong core instruction, and then we're able to really step back, assess, and look and see what all kids are needing, and be able to address those needs. So at the heart of my leading and the heart of my teaching is that all students can. And when I first started leading the McCullough School, that mindset wasn't present. The mindset was our students can't. They are economically disadvantaged. They're second language learners. We have a high special education population. These are kids that don't get support at home. There were a lot of reasons why the kids weren't making progress, none of which included that we needed to look at our instruction and how we were teaching. Once our mind shift changed, we started seeing kids prove us wrong, and that they could indeed make great gains when we adapted for their abilities. So that's at the core of what I believe. The second part of that, there was two parts of the core question.
And then which core values would you want to see in the staff that you hire?
Well, I would like to see that reflected in all staff, because teaching in a high needs population, and Gloucester has over 50% of its student population in the high needs range. The mindset needs to be that all kids can, and that it doesn't matter what happens before school and after school. What matters to us as educators is what we do with the time that we have those kids, and how do we meet them where they need to be met to be able to access standards and be able to move forward in their education. What kinds of practices are we going to adopt and believe in, and reflect on our own practices when kids aren't moving, and ask ourselves the right questions and our colleagues the right questions to go back and try it again in a different way, because it really matters that we believe that our kids can do it.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, Laura, you have the next question.
Okay, hi. How have you built lines of communication and reached out to build community constituencies and strengthen relationships with local stakeholders and families. And there's a second part. And please give an example of a situation in which these relationships, so relationships built through greater communication,
Yep.
were important in achieving a positive outcome.
Okay. So I would say number one communication tool is being present and being visible. So I am somebody who is in constant communication physically. So I'm in schools. I like to be in classrooms. When I was first appointed at the central level, I would go and visit principals, and when I would walk in, they'd be shocked and what's wrong? What's going on? And I'd say, well, I'm here to support you. I'm here to visit classrooms with you or to chat with teachers during some professional development time. It took a while for principals not to be surprised when I was in their building, or to be worried about why I was in their building. So, it got to the point where in some schools we would go and look at instruction. In other schools, principals would ask me to join a team planning time and talk with teachers and be able to gather information. Teachers will share with you what's going well and what's not going well. And they like to be asked, and they have a lot of really great insight. But if you're not there, you can't hear it. And in some cases, you can't see it. So you might get an email that, the air conditioning isn't working and that it's a really problem. But when you go into the classroom and you actually feel what that temperature is like, it's meaningful. And it one shows the staff that you care and that you're there. But it also gives you a frame of reference for how bad something is in a school because you've seen it and experienced it for yourself. So I think those conversations that happen when I'm in buildings are the most important part of communication. But I also understand, like, for parents, it's harder to get your superintendent and so you want to try to attend their sporting events, the clubs after school where parents are doing some pickup. Maybe visit the after school program so that you can touch base with some of the parents that are picking up or dropping off, depending on the times. So communication for me really is about finding the time to meet somebody face to face and to have a conversation. So having an opportunity to have luncheons or ongoing conversation with the mayor, going to your city council meetings and being able to talk with your city councilors and hearing their agendas and hearing what's going on in their work. Being present at town days, when the city is celebrating something, make sure you're there to show your support to the city side management and to see your families in a different way. So being present is number one. Number two is clear and concise and consistent. So whether it's a newsletter that's constructed every month that goes home to parents, highlighting, again, I really take to heart that vertical approach. So if I send home a monthly newsletter, it's going to highlight what's happening in elementary, it's going to highlight what's happening in middle and what's happening in the high school. So there's that vertical through line for families. I like to highlight on social media. So having a Twitter page, having students participate in snow days announcements, being able to really show your human side as well. So being at school council meetings with kids, having maybe an advisory group with students, having the Blackboard Connect, where a superintendent message can go out maybe once a quarter, letting parents know that grades are coming home, report cards are released. These are some questions you might want to ask your student about their report card. These are some questions you can ask your student about how they feel about school, important events that might be coming up that particular quarter, so that there's various approaches to the communication. But it's got to be clear, it's got to be concise, and it's got to be consistent. And interpreted for your families that need interpreters. So you have to really have that lens to be able to, you really want, you don't want any barriers. So you've got to think about what barriers in communication are there so that I can work around those and adapt them. The second part of the communication piece.
It was just an example of a situation in which your building relationships through communications was important to a positive outcome.
Sure. So I've always had, I've tried to support, I've always support enroll our city side activities, and became acquainted and had a good relationship with the city manager. And during one of my walkthroughs at a school, I was with a principal and we were looking at instruction. And as we walked down this hallway, we ended up having a conversation about some tiles on the floor that were just really torn up, and it was a hazardous area for the school, the kids to navigate. And I said to the leader, what's going on with this? Where is this on the priority list? And he said, I've had a work order in for a couple of years, and it just nothing. Now I have other things that are trumping this one. This is down on my priority list. So I, made a mental note of that, and then was very shortly that I was in a meeting with the town manager after that, and kind of explained this scenario to him. And I said, how might a principal elevate that concern to get some sort of resolution from the city? And, he said, I'll send some guys over tomorrow to take a look at it and to see if it's something that we can prioritize. And within 2 weeks, that was accomplished. So I feel like that, I feel like I have relationships. People know I don't go to the well often. I respect people's boundaries and their positions within their limited resources. But I think it's a mutual respect. They respect the work that I'm doing in the city on the behalf of kids. So when I have a question or a proposal for a way somebody can support us, that relationship has been established so that it's honored. The request can be honored.
Thank you.
Melissa, you have the next question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is about school committee relationships.
Okay.
Wait, Kathy was waving her hand.
Melissa, 1 minute. Jonathan, I think Kathy had a follow-up to that, and I had a follow-up to the question before. So, how do you want to handle this?
Unmute.
Jonathan, you're muted.
We'll catch on to this a couple more times. Joel, go ahead with the follow-up, and then we'll go to Kathy, okay?
Okay, so my follow-up was for the prior question. So in our district, we have elementary schools that perform disparately as far as assessment goes. I'm sure you've seen from your research.
Yep.
And probably a decade ago, the district kind of really started fusing the elementary school levels with additional resources, and the majority of them really took off and have really improved, as you can see. And, you know, 2 others have made improvements, but not at the same pace. And the one that struggles the most does get the most resources, arguably. They have a co-teaching model that no other elementary school has. They have typically the lowest students per classroom as far as that ratio is concerned. And they still have not quite been able to keep up the rate of achievement that the other elementary schools have had, you know, have been able to. And so when you mentioned that you're basically not looking to hear that because there are socioeconomic differences that there has to be a given achievement gap, I think that's great. And I'm just curious if you can point to something that you've seen work in other districts or in your experience that allows, despite the disparate backgrounds, a more uniform end result.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna speak to the Massachusetts multi-tiered systems of support. And it's really about drilling down into student achievement data and finding where there are discrepancies in learning, and then matching those discrepancies with additional instruction. So it's not about a new program. It's not about purchasing anything. It's about where are the instructional shifts and the lack of foundational skills, and then closing that with additional instruction. So in the intervention model would be the first question that I ask the team. How much time are those students exposed to what we refer to as double dipping? So they get quality tier 1 instruction, the core instruction, and then how much time are they given in just right instructional settings? So where the instruction is at their instructional level as opposed to a little bit above or way above, so that you're able to close and fill in the misconceptions or the missing information. So I would look at intervention model. I would look at professional development around targeted intervention instruction. I would look at what kinds of materials they use in intervention, not only there, but in the schools where that achievement gap is closing more significantly. What instructional shifts are happening there that we can maybe bring over or introduce at another school? And it may be the progress monitoring process is too spread out. So sometimes schools go 8-week cycles of looking at data, when maybe what you need to do is shift to a 5-week cycle so that you're catching kids sooner if they're not making progress. You're not going an additional 3 weeks, that you're really looking at that 5-week data and determining who's ready to move out and who still needs more instruction.
Thank you. Kathy, you had a follow-up question on?
Yes, my follow-up question had to do with the communication question. And I was just curious in which roles that you had, did you have that interaction with parents? You gave some good examples of parent communication, and I'm just curious what positions that you were able to do a lot of that.
So I would say every single role I have been in, and I still influence parent communication in the role that I'm in now, in my coaching of principals. So I have worked with principals about starting a S'more newsletter. It's a format, it's a very scripted format to help get information not only out to families, but out to teachers. So in some of the districts that I work in, I'm working with principals on building those systems and structures for communication. In my role as a principal, I did a Sunday night message. Every Sunday night, I did a Blackboard Connect message where I spoke to families. I told parents what was coming up in the week, what to be on the lookout for in terms of backpacks, because it's hard for parents to keep track of backpack information. So we would try to be systematic, send all of that information home on Monday. So my nightly message would come on a Sunday night, reminding them to be on the lookout for this, this, and this that's going to be in your child's backpack tomorrow. I had one of the first things we did is we started 3 parent outreach evenings at my school. So there was really minimal parent school community kind of connection, and parents weren't really feeling a part of their school community. So we started with the fall festival. In the winter, we did a winter carnival, and in the spring, we did an ice cream sundae kind of thing. And the purpose around it was to have parents come to school and experience something positive, to have teachers and parents interacting in a positive way. I grew that to the point where our winter carnival became a community event where I would have vendors throughout our community come so that our parents could pick up, they could register for WIC at these events. They could sign up their child for Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. There was a karate instructor there that would, take the first 10 kids that signed up for free. We had our Department of Children and Families there, talking to families about counseling services. We had South Bay counseling there. So I would try to, while the parents were here, connect them with the resources that they needed in the home. So that's one example. As I'm trying to think about in other positions.
That's okay. Thank you. You definitely, thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a few more questions, so we need to keep moving. So Melissa, you're up.
Thank you. So my question is about school committee relationships with the superintendent.
Okay.
The roles and responsibilities of school committees and superintendents are sometimes clear and sometimes ambiguous. For example, budget approval versus budget implementation, or personnel policy and finance versus personnel administration, or even dealing with parents and teachers with concerns about complaints. My question is, can you describe some situations where the roles and responsibilities have challenged you and how you would work with us, the school committee, if you become our superintendent?
So my understanding and the way that I see the relationship evolving is the school committee is tasked by the town as elective officials they're trusted to develop a vision for the school department, the school system. Along with that vision, some goals and some initiatives. And the superintendent's job is to operationalize that vision, to take what the school committee is putting forward in terms of an agenda for the school department. The superintendent then puts it into practice. So they're all doing it, hopefully, with a shared vision. So the superintendent comes on board, shares the vision, and they gain momentum in terms of building a relationship of trust, outcome-based, that what really everybody wants is what's best for kids. So one of the things that I found challenging as a school principal from the school committee is they created a policy around Lowell residents having the right to interview for any position they were qualified for. So as a principal, that could mean your pool of applicants for whether it's kitchen staff, whether it was teaching staff, paraprofessional staff, you could be in the hundreds in terms of having to interview. So that was one of the policies that I think after school leaders began to communicate with the school committee, that we were able to kind of grow and help shift that thinking a little bit. But, you know, I think there's all kinds of structures that are provided, that can be provided if you're proactive as a team. So as a superintendent, I would hope that the school committee that I worked with, we would have some of those conversations prior to blurred lines or crossing into each other's work, that we could talk about what are some structures or systems that we can put in place for when we're questioning what direction people are going, or how we're going to go through the process of something, so that you kind of have that outlined prior to having difficult conversations. So you have that structure for the difficult conversation before the topic of a difficult conversation arises, if that makes any sense to you.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Kathy.
Okay, the question is related to budget. What is your view of the role of the superintendent vis-a-vis the district's chief financial officer? In other words, how do you build a budget, monitor the district's finances, and develop a good reporting system?
So I think the budget is always driven by your goals and your district improvement plan. So it should be that there are certain priorities, instructional priorities, facility priorities, operational priorities that you have prioritized, that you want to bring to fruition. So that would kind of be leading some of the, helping to inform some of the decisions. I think the role of the superintendent is to bring that instructional lens to materials that are on the budget, included in the budget, and to be able to assess and again prioritize how those look in practice in schools and with in service to kids. Sometimes the budget can be created in a way that it includes things that it has historically included. And once you stop and start asking questions about the effectiveness of that particular line item in practice and in service to kids teaching, you find that it's no longer really bringing about the outcomes you'd intended originally. So you may try to reallocate that fund or cut that particular initiative out of the budget. But I see the superintendent's role of really informing the budget, making sure that all of the line items are in service to teaching and learning, even the operational piece. I know as the remote learning possibilities of the academic fall, there's going to be drastic operational sides of budgeting that maybe aren't in place right now. So looking at transportation, where you're typically transporting 70 kids on a bus, you may only be able to transport 20 kids on a bus. So how is that going to affect your budget for next year? We're looking at, being able to use those operational funds to sterilize and clean buildings. So if that isn't in the budget currently, what are we going to have to try to take off the table to be able to make that a priority? Because those shifts are going to have to happen. If we go to, there are some scenarios saying that we may go into Saturday learning what is that going to look like to open and manage buildings on Saturdays? So I think going into the next year, looking at your instructional side and looking at your operational side, it may look different than it has in the past. But I think the superintendent's role is to really, again, how do we activate and bring alive our district vision and plan, and in some cases with a really stringent and budget that needs to be really tightly aligned to those priorities.
Okay. I don't see anybody's hands up. So we'll move on to the next question. Gloucester is about to submit a schematic design to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for a new elementary school, which will house a consolidation of 2 smaller elementary schools. If approved by MSBA, Gloucester will have to secure our part of the funding with a debt exclusion override vote in November. Are you in favor of consolidation? And if so, how would you make that case to the public?
So in favor of consolidation of the 2 schools? Am I understanding that question correctly?
Yeah, are you in favor? We have 2 small, just to give you, the 2 small schools are East Gloucester and Veterans, and they're both about 200 and, I don't know, 10, 20 kids. It'd be a school of 440, the new school.
So I will say that I'm from what I've learned and researched, I am in favor. I feel very encouraged by the communication and the planning that is happening at the district level right now. I was able to listen to the 2 leaders have a conversation about it. And it seems like their teachers they're building momentum with their staff, building a team with their staff. They're being able to be very strategic and anticipating some of the challenges and talking through those things already with their teaching teams. So it sounds like from a leadership level at the school base and teacher base, it sounds like there's a genuine excitement around the consolidation, and that there are good practices in place for planning for the merging of those 2 teaching teams. So how I would go about communicating that out into the district is really by bringing it out and forward on most agendas, talking as much as you can about it, bringing the plan places, helping to share the community with the community, the amazing plan that's been developed in terms of the facility, and also talking about the educational environment and what it doesn't have. I mean, I think when you went through your initial feasibility study, there were some real serious concerns around what both buildings lacked. So, kind of letting people be aware of, helping people understand that. I feel whenever I communicate anything out as a leader, I do it in 3 phases. 1, I try to talk about the what is the decision. So, these 2 schools are being consolidated, and give a little bit of information about the what. And then I go into communicating the why. So why did we end up making this decision to consolidate 2 schools and bring in a new building? This is the why behind our thinking as a district. These are the people who helped inform that decision, the parents involved, the teachers involved, the city side folks that were involved. And then finally, the how. So I think a lot of school leaders are good at sharing out the what and the why sometimes, not always, but sometimes the how piece gets dropped. So I think communicating out the funding that needs to be generated, the funding that's going to come back from the state to support this, the great programming that's going to be able to be offered through this new facility to students, how it's going to enhance the community, when, will it be able to be rented to the community? So even maybe if you don't have students and you're in an adult indoor soccer league, or you're in an adult basketball league or a gardening club, that the facility is going to be able to be used for that purpose as well, so that you're kind of letting everybody see how this is going to move your community forward and enrich the lives of both kids and the adults that have the opportunity to use the facility, and see the value in the additional spending.
Thank you. Laura, you have the next question.
Thank you. So you've touched on some of this already. I'll abbreviate my question. You've already spoken to the importance of the theory or the belief that all kids can learn, and to the extent to which you focus on curriculum and instruction for that. In addition to that, what function do good finances and emotional support play in supporting kids' outcomes? And as superintendent, what can you do to improve their outcomes in those ways?
So I think a robust budget is always a plus, right? But it's not a necessity. I think you can get good results by strategic thinking, excellent communicating, and aligning priorities. So if you're trying to fund a lot of different priorities, nothing really can translate from that, because the focus is too scattered. So if you have limited, well, I shouldn't say nothing, there can be good outcomes, but if you're on a limited budget, it's really important to focus and go deep into something if you're going to prioritize it with a financial purchase. You want to go deep into it, and you want to do it to fidelity so that it can really translate to sustainable improvement. So as I believe your question is also twofold in terms of the social emotional component. So programming is great, and there's a lot of great curriculum out there that can be purchased to support the social emotional growth of students K through 12. There's, however, a framework, national framework called the CASEL framework, and it focuses on 5 strategic components of child development. And there's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. So that framework is what should guide K to 12 social emotional learning and citizenship. There are great programs you can buy at every level, but there's also really consistent practices that teachers can put in place and embed with quality literature and create in advisory at the middle school level that support that structure. So teachers will always tell you that having the curriculum, having the guiding questions, that's a bonus, and that's the best. But if they're provided the planning time and the framework to create some of those structures and not have that financial burden, that's also a possibility. So I think we can always do what's right by kids. Money isn't always the answer. There are times when it's really just about the relationship with the student, making time for human connection with them, helping them with some outreach, connecting them with services in your community. Those don't cost anything. They just take skill and time, and it's a value that you want to bring to your school system.
Thank you.
Did that answer it for you?
I think so. There may be follow-ups, but I think so. Thank you.
Samantha, you have the next question.
Can you please tell us about an instance where you've demonstrated leadership or commitment to equity in your work?
Sure. So at the state, we're doing a tremendous amount. That is the commissioner's priority, is looking at culturally proficient teaching and learning practices, and ensuring that equity is at the front of all of our work. So when I was the director of accountability and school improvement, I went to a summer workshop on cultural proficiency, and it was a 3-day workshop, and it was really, it rose to the level, a lot of the implicit, explicit bias we have as educators, the kinds of conversations that we avoid around diversity and equity. And what I realized was we don't have those we had not had those conversations as a team in Lowell before. This was all kind of new learning, and it wasn't just around culture, it was also around diversity. So how do we talk about our students with special needs? How do we talk about our families that are living in poverty? So we, this will get to one of the financial questions, kind of combine them both. We were in a really deficit model budget at the time. So I knew that it was important to bring that learning back to our building leaders and our school leaders. So I created a professional development opportunity for our leaders around this learning. And I selected the text by Zaretta Hammond, which is Cultural Proficient Teaching and the Brain. And she was actually the presenter. I know this text is in use at your high school. And I created that workshop environment, and we had the conversation, and the principals said, we've got to do more of this. We've got to get this out to our teachers. So I created a professional development opportunities for leaders then to go and give at their school level. So we took them through various conversations around equity, around how do you meet the needs of kids? How do you resist the urge to teach on something when you know you've left somebody behind on the continuum of understanding? And we had some courageous conversations. So I feel really proud of that. One, I brought that learning to 100 leaders. Then as leadership team, we brought it to the entire teaching community in Lowell on one professional development day. And then I worked with individual principals who wanted to go deeper into that work. So that's one example of how I brought cultural proficient teaching and thinking around implicit and explicit bias to the awareness of teachers. In my work now, I do a lot of data analysis with teaching teams and school leaders, and we will look in particular at the district subgroup data. So we'll look at the high needs group in general, then we look at the student with disabilities, and then we look at the economically disadvantaged students. And oftentimes we discover that there can be high achievement in a school, but very low achievement and low growth for particular subgroups. So then the conversations begin around why is that? So what are the practices that are happening in schools that are not equitable and that we are not getting the same kind of outcomes from students that are in subgroups? And how do we have those difficult conversations and then move on to improve practices? So that's another way that we kind of bring those conversations up to the surface.
Thank you.
Joel, you have the next question.
Thank you. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the MCAS as an evaluation tool for students, an evaluation tool for teachers, and an evaluation tool for districts?
Okay. So I think MCAS is one indicator, and it should never be used in isolation for any reason. It can give you an overall glance at certain things that are happening in terms of achievement and growth, but it's not an indicator of the district as a whole. When I was in Lowell, I was part of the MCIEA team. So that's a group, a consortium in Massachusetts that is looking to find a more equitable way to rate or to determine district effectiveness and school effectiveness, so that it shifts away from the MCAS model and the accountability model and more focuses on school culture, climate, student achievement. It takes into consideration project-based assessments so that you're not just giving students a paper pencil type assessment, but that you are allowing students to show what they know in terms of standards-based learning through tasks that they are engaged in and invested in. So that is very intriguing to me. So I feel like it's a point that we can all begin, but data needs to be triangulated. So you take your school-based data, your MCAS data, even your classroom data, and you want to triangulate it at minimum. You want to compare it to 2 other data points. How are students doing in terms of formative assessments that you're giving as a teacher or as a school, summative assessments that you're giving as a teacher or school? What kind of rubrics are you creating for project-based learning? And are you able to use an assessment tool outside of the classroom? So I'm thinking of a technology base, like some of the STAR, some systems, some districts use STAR, some districts use iReady. So how is that comparison data being used? So in terms of using it to assess teachers, I think you can assess, I think the growth of students is an indicator as opposed to achievement. I think if you're looking as a teacher at your student growth, that's an indicator, because all students within a year of your instruction should show somewhat of a year's worth of growth. So if you have maybe high growth, high achievement, low growth, you need to be asking yourself as a teacher, why are kids not showing the higher growth percentiles? It can help you isolate particular issues around standards. If you drill deep enough into your MCAS, you can go into an item analysis, and you can look and see that 40% of your 4th grade missed key details. They all got those 3 questions wrong. So we need to go back into our curriculum and hit key details in a different way. And that data is available, 3 through 12, or 3 through 10. So you can drill that to that depth. But I wouldn't use it as a single point to make any sort of determination about a school or a teacher.
No follow-ups. Melissa, you have the next question.
Thank you. My question is about collective bargaining, and it's a 3-part question.
Okay.
What what is the best role of the superintendent in collective bargaining, in your opinion? What are your experiences at the bargaining table? And how would you propose that we use the bargaining process to promote student achievement as well as control our expenses?
So I will say that the superintendent's role, I know, varies in districts. So some superintendents are not part of that process. Some superintendents are. So I'm not 100% sure how that moves forward in how that works in Gloucester. However, if I were to be involved in collective bargaining, it would always be first and foremost with good intention. That I'm a 16-year educator. I've been in the classroom for 16 years. I'm an administrator that has high expectations of teaching, and I truly believe that teachers do incredibly hard things and support our kids the very best they can with, and very often with some challenging situations. So I think collective bargaining needs to be done in good faith and in fairness to the workforce. That being said, there are all kinds of initiatives that need to also be embedded in what's best for kids. And those sometimes are financial, sometimes they're new facilities, their transportation costs, they're supporting our students with disabilities, outplacement, out of district placements. So it's a balance. But I think moving forward and being transparent in what the resources are, what the demands are on the districts and on the district and on the finances, and really being in it with a collaborative intent and really trying to keep the kids at the focus. I know collective bargaining, so much of the conversation is around adults, but really it's about what adults and what finances bring to kids. And so kind of keeping that on the table as well. As far as experience, in Lowell, we had a very large school district. We had a labor attorney. I was not at the table for collective bargaining, so I can't speak from that personal experience. I can just speak to the practical thinking that I would bring to a table if I were a superintendent of schools.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Kathy, you have the final question.
Okay, this could be considered a kind of a follow-up to your answer where you brought up the example of professional development and the initiative you implemented. So this question basically says, how do you know if the professional development programs or initiatives have affected the knowledge, skills, and practices of educators within your district?
Okay, so I think whenever you're talking professional development, you need to have a plan, and it needs to be aligned to curriculum. It needs to be aligned to the time that teachers are spending with their collaborative teams, and brought to lesson planning and development, looking at data. So whatever the district initiative is around growing teacher capacity should be translating and become more evident in classroom instruction. So you're going to be able to have conversation with teacher teams, with coaches, with principals around pedagogy and shifts in thinking, and maybe in instructional shifts and the way that time is being allocated in instructional blocks, the way that assessment is being used, and then circling back and having conversations with teachers around, is it working? Sometimes we make decisions around professional development and teachers aren't always on board, and the more we go along and the more content exposure and coaching they get, the more on board they become. Sometimes it's a slow start, and it stays with some slow momentum. And after you've given a practice some time, and if it's still not working, you've got to talk about why and make a shift, whether it's a slight shift into the professional development. I've had teachers say to me, you know, we didn't spend enough time talking about that launch part of the lesson. And so, you know, you're talking about using a lesson format of launch, explore, summary, and we're on summary, and I'm still feeling like I don't have a good launch. I don't feel like I have enough information to really, I still need more work in that. Well, you have to honor what teachers are saying and offer that opportunity to go back and refine that learning. Just like kids, adults need time, and there are a vast variety of adult learners. So there has to be that opportunity to go back and clarify and have some you know, a double exposure to something, or a more visual exposure to be able to go in and see somebody do it, watch a colleague do it. So you kind of have this reciprocal process where the conversation is continuing, and you stop after a certain point in the plan and you say, how do we feel about what we've done this far? And are we ready to move on to the next step in our professional development plan to move forward? And if the answer is no, resoundingly, you've got to fix that. And for even for the few that are saying, I'm not ready yet, you've got to put a plan in place to help them along.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, that's all the questions. Would you like to just wrap up your presentation?
Sure. So I come to you with a great interest in Gloucester. I have had the opportunity to meet and work with your middle school team at your middle school, your instructional leadership team. They are having some really courageous conversations, being very transparent about thinking about their data, thinking about you know, what kids need from them. And I am continually impressed by their ability to reflect and plan for the future. And when I look at the district improvement plan around unification and alignment, the usage of data is a priority, your community and professional culture is a priority. These are all things that I feel I'm strong. I have a strong history. I've been able to do this work. I think it's helpful when a turnaround leader can say, I've been there, I understand your frustrations, we're gonna go back, we're gonna circle back to this, you're gonna get it. This is a system that we can lean into and activate and see if that can support the work. So I feel like my skill set is one that could bring some great stuff and interesting innovation to Gloucester. And yet I feel like the people that I've been exposed to and work with at your central and school-based level, I can certainly learn from too. So thank you for the opportunity. And it was great spending this time with you.
Well, thank you very much. And like I say, we've got 3 more interviews to do. And we hope to wrap this phase up by the end of the week, and we'll be in touch by the end of the week. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's do the same thing we did before. We'll just go around the table or the screen or whatever we want to call it these days, and just give a little synopsis of what you thought. Kathy, you want to lead off?
Sure, I won't say too much, but I found her very genuine. Her experience was definitely a lot in the teaching and learning area, which obviously is one of the important pieces of the instructional leadership. I find that some of her experience showed very good sensitivity to families and outreach to families in I think, an effective way. So those are a few things that I wanted to highlight that I like.
Laura?
So I'm sort of, as the new person to this, I'm taking everyone in and listening carefully. I liked her. I thought she had good experience and a lot to say, and I'm sort of going to stick with my just keeping an open mind to everyone.
Okay. Joel?
Again, only being 2 out of 5, I don't want to make any definitive statements. I thought that she certainly had some skills and experiences that aligned with the needs of our districts. I thought that was good. I liked her background, that she's been both on the front line and working with DESE, so she understands both ends of that spectrum. But like I said, I don't want to make any comparisons or make any definitive statements until we meet the other 3.
Okay. Safafia?
I am, thank you. I was raising my hand and putting it down so you knew I was here when you asked my questions. I'm just doing a little the checkbox, what I like, what I don't like, and that's it. Like I said, so far, they both have great qualities and expertise, and I'm just going to wait until it's all done.
Okay. Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, I think her experience is really well-rounded. She has both sort of a on the ground experience and more of a policy, most recently a more of a policy outlook, which I think is sort of a helpful view to have coming in with both. But again, like everyone else said, keeping an open mind, still have 3 more to go. Good candidate so far though.
Yeah. Melissa?
So before I comment, I just want everyone to know I have a clearly open mind and would not be making a decision on anyone. You're just in the moment and speaking from the moment. And just because I'm making comments doesn't mean that not open-minded. But so my experience was she clearly loves children and she makes communication a priority. And I believe she would be a huge asset to our district in the area of high needs. But my takeaway from this interview is that she talks from her heart. She has a lot of passion for kids. She did check off the box about being present and visible in classes or around the schools, which is huge for me. But I do have a concern about her experience in the areas of budget and budget development and oversight and lack of experience in collective bargaining. So if we interview her again, which could be a great possibility because she's a very good candidate, I would just want to inquire more to those experiences or question her on to get more feedback back from those areas. But other than that, she was very nice, and I can clearly see why she was put forward as a candidate because she has a lot to offer if she was to be our superintendent.
Okay. I thought I liked her demeanor. I liked the way she spoke. I liked the speed at which she spoke and how she was very articulate and very good at explaining whatever it was she was trying to get across. She was very adept at taking every question and bringing it to her strengths, which is teaching and learning. I thought she was but like Melissa, I went away saying, well, there's a bunch of things that we expect a superintendent to do that I didn't hear much about. And so I echo what you just said, that there's more to hear from her. So, another good, strong candidate, and it's so far so good. So anything else before we adjourn?
Yeah, just for some perspective, again, trying to make sure we're all kind of thinking here, because it's very, very, very interesting to hear from Melissa and from Jonathan, obviously very experienced, especially with Melissa with however many dozen superintendent searches at this point under her belt, about the budget concerns. Because one of the things I liked about this last candidate was her answer to a lot of questions wasn't you know, wasn't that throwing money solves everything. She was, you know, sometimes there's time to spend, sometimes there's time to rework with what you have. And I thought her example of being in the tier 3 in the Lowell district with the tier 4, it got $1 million. She got 0 to do the same thing that tier 4 did. Although it's not putting together a comprehensive budget, it seems to show to me some knowledge of the realities of finance in the school district.
No, that was very heartening to hear her say that, you know, it isn't just about money.
I would agree with that completely, Joel.
Yeah. Okay, anything else before we go? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Can I ask a quick question before you adjourn?
Hi, Dorothy.
So tomorrow night, just starting, I just should have the candidate prepared to jump in a few minutes after the start of the meeting, because you're just, once you know everyone's there, you'll jump right into the interview, correct?
Yes, and some of us have a meeting right before that, which, you know, hopefully will be over. We'll make it work.
Okay, I'll let the candidate know to just hang tight then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't be able to. I have a 7 o'clock live stream with Senator Markey, so I don't know when I'll be done.
Yeah, but this is at 5.
Right.
Okay.
But then we only have one at 5 then?
Just one at 5.
That's right. Tonight was the 2. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. It's kind of difficult. So I think I'm ready to throw all the iPads out just for the night. Ridiculous. It really is. People think that we're not doing anything. Should really sit in one of our homes for a day.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Especially with this opening. It's like chaotic right now.
Yeah.
But
Well,
we'll get there.
Keep up the good work.
Whoops.
Yes.
Can I just ask one question before we adjourn? Just on timing, I know that we can go longer, but I'm wondering about, you know, I thought it was very interesting that she brought up what it's going to look like going back to school in the fall. And I think that's a very relevant question that I would like to come back to if we've got the time. So I'd love to get a sense of sort of just realistically, you know, when it's 8:30, are we, you know, Joel had said, let's put a pin in that. And I'm just wondering sort of going forward, do we want to ask that question after if it was raised, or are we just going to sort of stay where we are?
Well, it's up to the committee. I mean, we can spend, you know, we can just keep going until we're through with questions if you want.
Well, no, I'm just saying it came up. I mean,
no,
she mentioned it. And so, yeah, so I just want to know procedurally how we want to handle that kind of thing.
Well, and I just said it's up to the committee. It's if you want to keep going, we can do that. Melissa, I see your hand.
Sorry, I didn't know if I was muted or not. I think I have a concern about that. Not that I don't want to hear the answer, because I do, but I don't think it's fair that we haven't asked the past 2 candidates that, and we're going to ask it going forward. I'm someone that's very procedural, and I think all candidates should have the same questions to be rated on. And if we start asking more questions that other candidates didn't have an opportunity to, I think that may be an unfair advantage to either side. And I don't know that I'm willing to go down that road at this point. Maybe for the final 2, but not for the first 5.
Laura?
Well, I'm just, she mentioned it, and she asked if I mean, this wasn't, I'm not saying asking an additional question, although of course people can be watching these interviews and knowing what we're asking, who are later interviews. I'm just gonna, that for me is a procedural issue. But this particular case, she mentioned it, she asked Joel if he wanted it, and we told her, or Joel said, you know, let's put a pin in that. So I'm just trying to, no, I agree with you, we can't add additional questions, but when it comes up, how do we want to handle that?
But didn't she take advantage when Jonathan was looking for the mayor's question? She was able to circle back to it.
Yeah.
She did answer the question. So although I asked her to put a pin in it because I was frankly unsure of how I was supposed to respond to that, it sounded like she was able to get that answer out to us. And so, you know,
Okay.
If someone else independently answers my question by mentioning the, you know, the realignment of how a school day looks, then we can give them opportunity. If they choose not to make that part of their answer, then we don't bring it up.
Okay, that sounds fair. Yeah.
Melissa, you still got your hand up, but you're okay. You're done. Anybody else? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Maria, wait, roll call vote?
Can I ask a question before we shut off? Sorry. So I heard that we're not going to post these, the links to the city website because we don't want other candidates to be able to access them. Is there a way to get the link sent to us if we want to re-watch the interview before we make a decision on Friday?
That's a Brendan,
That's my question.
that's a
Yeah.
Brendan question. Or Grant.
So anyways,
We
taking
can
a
do
vote
that.
here. He should look at the website. We've never opened beach parking lots ever before Memorial Day week.
Uh,
It was
Well,
closed because of all the outside.
Savavia, we're
There you
hearing
go.
a conversation with somebody else. So what I just heard Grant or Brendan say was that can be done, that they can send
They
us.
can.
Yes, we
I
can
mute-
send you, just the committee members, just the link to the video, so only you guys can watch it. And then at a later time, we can take the same video link and put it out there for everyone else to watch.
Great. That would
Well,
be,
I was muted, so I don't know how you heard me because the red thing was on unless someone else. This has been happening quite frequently. But anyways, can somebody look at the websites? We did not close, and I hope people listen, we did not close the damn beaches. The beaches have never opened before Memorial Day weekend. People need to understand and relax that certain things are for reasons. Niles Beach, the police asked us because first of all, missing people here, missing people there, or doing this or partying at night. And I'm sorry, Stage 4 Park was asked to be closed because all outsiders were coming in. Gloucester residents were not using Stage 4 Park. So I want to clarify that, but I don't understand. If the red is off, how can you people hear me? How many, I mean,
we're hearing you.
now you can. I have it off, but how could you hear me before? I'm lucky I didn't call you guys idiots because I love you.
So
I don't understand how it went. I really don't. Brandon, did someone unmute me by mistake? Can you unmute me, Jonathan, when I have it muted?
I don't know. I've never tried it.
We could do it, but we do not actively unmute people.
Well, someone unmuted me, and because it was red, and I'm talking because, like I said, I have other things and things to deal with. And then they said, "You're laughing. You can hear me," but it was still red. So I need that checked. IT needs to check that, please, because you know what? It's happened more than once to a lot of people. You're lucky I shut off the video because if you really want to see this, there you go. All right. Have a good night. I'm checking out because I got to go on to the other one now. Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
So how do I get access to the link? Wait, we can't adjourn yet.
Brendan and Grant are going to send it to us, email it to us.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Just to us. Okay, roll call vote, Maria.
Ms. Watson,
Yes.
Ms. Weason,
Yes.
Kathy Clancy,
Yes.
Mr. Favazza,
Yes.
Chairman Pope,
Yes.
Ms. Prince,
Yes.
and the mayor's already gone.
The meeting is adjourned. I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much.